The stars themselves seemed to pause in their celestial dance as the man who understood their deepest secrets prepared to close his eyes for the final time, leaving behind a world that he had fundamentally reshaped with the power of pure thought. Imagine a silence so profound that it vibrates with the weight of every equation ever written, a stillness that marks the end of an era where one human mind could grasp the very curvature of the universe. The night of April 17, 1955, at Princeton Hospital was draped in a silence that felt heavier than the simple absence of sound. Within the sterile and dimly lit confines of room 330, the air held a crystalline weight, a pressure born from the realization that the most influential mind of the modern era was flickering in its final moments. Albert Einstein, the physicist who had untangled the invisible threads of space and time, lay in a modest hospital bed, surrounded by the cold, clinical instruments of a world that could not save him. He was 76 years old, a figure of legendary proportions whose wild hair and gentle eyes had become the global icon of human intelligence. But in this sanctuary of white sheets and rhythmic medical monitors, he was a man seeking the ultimate simplicity. The world outside those hospital walls continued its frantic rotation, oblivious to the fact that the primary architect of its space-time understanding was about to depart for the infinite unknown. Einstein's philosophy on death was as elegant and balanced as his theories on gravity and light. He did not fear the cessation of his biological processes. Rather, he viewed it as a necessary and poetic return to the fundamental energy of the universe that he had studied with such religious devotion. He had lived a life of extraordinary intellectual labor, moving with grace and humility from the quiet desks of the Swiss Patent Office to the highest summits of scientific immortality. Yet, as the shadows of the room lengthened and his breathing became a shallow, rhythmic cadence, he held fast to a final, unwavering wish that reflected his lifelong distaste for idol worship. He had explicitly commanded that his body should not become a monument or a relic. He loathed the idea of his physical remains being turned into a site of pilgrimage for a cult of personality he had always found uncomfortable and unnecessary. "I want to be cremated so people don't come to worship at my bones," he had told his close associates with a finality that allowed for no further argument. He desired his ashes to be scattered in an undisclosed location, a final act of integration back into the cosmic dust he had spent a lifetime deciphering. For Einstein, the brain was merely the hardware that had facilitated the software of his thought. Once the light of consciousness was extinguished, the instrument was meant to be discarded and returned to the elements. As the clock on the wall moved with agonizing precision toward the early hours of April 18, the atmosphere in the hospital became heavy with the gravity of history. The nurses moved with practiced, hushed movements, checking his vitals with a reverence that spoke of their awareness of the giant in their care. There was no grand dialogue in those final minutes, no dramatic final speech to summarize the mysteries he had solved or the ones he was leaving behind for future generations. There was only the steady, cold progression of the fourth dimension, the very time he had taught the world to see as something fluid, relative, and inextricably linked to the fabric of space. At 1:15 a.m., the final breath left his lungs, and the transition from a living being to a historical legacy was complete. The man who had looked into the heart of the sun and redefined the nature of light was gone. However, in the deep shadows of the pathology department downstairs, a different kind of transition was being prepared. While the world prepared to mourn the loss of a titan, one man was standing in the clinical darkness, ready to seize a piece of that genius for himself, setting in motion a bizarre and unauthorized odyssey that would last for decades. The corridors held the secret of a theft that was not born of malice, but of a distorted obsession with the physical secrets of brilliance. As the dawn began to break over Princeton in shades of cold blue, the giant had fallen, but the vessel of his thoughts was about to be stolen away from the fires that were supposed to set him free. The transition from the hushed reverence of the hospital room to the stark, clinical reality of the basement morgue was a journey into the cold heart of biological accounting. Shortly after the great man had passed, his physical remains were transported through the silent, dimly lit corridors to a place of white tiles and polished stainless steel. This was the domain of Dr. Thomas Harvey, the hospital's chief pathologist, a man who lived within the observable facts of anatomy and viewed the human body as a complex machine that eventually reached a point of failure. On this specific April morning, as the body of Albert Einstein was laid upon the cold examination table, Harvey found himself standing in the shadow of a presence that defied routine classification. He was not merely preparing to catalog a cause of death. He was standing before the mortal shell of the most celebrated intellect in human history. The atmosphere in the basement morgue was saturated with a heavy, blue silence, punctuated only by the distant hum of ventilation and the metallic clinking of surgical instruments being readied for their task. Harvey's initial movements were governed by the mechanical precision of his profession. He began the autopsy with the standard protocols required by law and medical ethics, documenting each observation with the detachment of a man who had seen death in 1,000 forms. He noted the cause of death, a massive rupture in the abdominal aortic aneurysm, a clear, biological signature of a life that had reached its natural capacity. But as the procedure moved toward the internal examination of the head, a silent, seismic shift occurred within Harvey's consciousness. He was aware of Einstein's profound wish for cremation and the family's expectation that the body would remain whole. Yet, as he looked at the head of the man who had visualized the curvature of space-time, Harvey was gripped by a sudden and overwhelming impulse. He felt a desperate, almost religious duty to preserve the organ that had birthed the theory of relativity. To Harvey, the idea of allowing this specific brain to be reduced to ash felt like a crime against the collective future of humanity. He believed that within the architecture of that gray matter lay a hidden map, a physical explanation for how genius manifests in the biological realm. In the solitary silence of the morgue, with no witnesses to challenge his moral compass, Harvey made a decision that would forever sever his life from the path of professional normalcy. With a series of delicate, methodical incisions, he removed the top of the skull. There, beneath the protective membranes, was the brain of Albert Einstein. In the pale, artificial light of the lab, it looked deceptively ordinary, a soft, gray mass that seemed too fragile to have contained the secrets of the quantum world. Harvey lifted it with a trembling reverence, weighing it in his palms with the care of a priest handling a sacred relic. It weighed 1,230 grams, a number he etched into his memory and his notes. At that moment, he ceased to be an officer of the hospital and became a self-appointed guardian of an unauthorized treasure. He placed the brain into a glass jar filled with formaldehyde, effectively hiding it from the world and from the family who awaited the return of their father. As he worked in the deepening blue shadows of the basement, Harvey was unaware that he had just initiated an odyssey that would lead to his dismissal and his isolation. The autopsy was officially over, but the theft of the century had just begun. He looked at the jar for a long time, the blue light reflecting off the glass, realizing that he now held the physical engine of modern physics in his hands. This was no longer a medical procedure. It was a transition into a clandestine existence that would define the rest of his days. The decision to withhold Albert Einstein's brain from the furnace of the crematorium was not merely a moment of professional rebellion, but a profound seismic shift in the history of medical ethics. As doctor, Thomas Harvey stood alone in the dim blue light of the pathology laboratory. The silence of the room seemed to expand with the physical weight of his transgression. He had crossed a boundary that was intended to be absolute, a moral threshold designed to protect the final dignity of the individual from the insatiable curiosity of the collective. In that small, sterile chamber, the sacred vow of the physician, the promise to honor the dead and respect the wishes of the living, was traded for the uncertain promise of scientific discovery. The ethical rupture was instantaneous and irreversible, creating a void in the moral fabric of the hospital that would never be truly mended. Harvey believed he was acting as a servant of the future, a pioneer who understood that some artifacts are too precious for the fire. But in the eyes of the present, he was a violator of a man's last will and a family's trust. Einstein had been explicit in his desire to be cremated in his entirety to prevent his remains from becoming objects of worship or study. Yet here was his brain, suspended in formaldehyde, becoming the very thing he had feared most. This act of scientific defiance initiated a cascade of moral dilemmas that reached far beyond the hospital walls. The administration at Princeton Hospital soon discovered the truth, and the air in the executive offices became as cold and heavy as the morgue itself. They found themselves caught in an impossible position, balanced between the immense scientific potential of the specimen and the catastrophic legal and reputational nightmare that a theft of this magnitude represented. How does one justify the preservation of a stolen mind, even if it is the mind of the century? The board members moved through the corridors like shadows, their voices hushed by the realization that they were now accomplices to a historical crime. The question of biological property was thrust into the spotlight. Does a genius lose the right to his own body once he ceases to breathe? And does the state or the scientific community have a claim to the hardware of thought? These were not just academic questions. They were the beginning of a 40-year storm that would follow Harvey into his own exile. The most painful and profound confrontation occurred when the truth was finally revealed to Einstein's family. For Hans Albert Einstein, the news was a second wave of grief, a realization that his father's final request for a quiet, unadorned exit from the world had been violently and selfishly disregarded. He saw the act not as a service to science, but as a betrayal of a man who had spent his life fighting for the autonomy of the individual. Harvey was summoned to face the grieving son, and in that meeting, the atmosphere was charged with a tension that no amount of professional justification could ease. Harvey did not apologize with the humility expected of a subordinate who had overstepped. Instead, he spoke with the quiet, almost disturbing fervor of a man who believed he was fulfilling a divine mandate for humanity. He pleaded with Hans Albert, promising that the brain would never be treated as a trophy or a curiosity, but only as an object of the most rigorous and respectful scientific study. It was a desperate bargain made in the heat of a public scandal, a promise that would bind Harvey to the brain for the rest of his existence. In a moment of immense pressure and sorrow, Hans Albert granted a reluctant, retroactive permission. This shaky agreement did not heal the ethical wound. It merely cauterized it, leaving a scar that would define the rest of Harvey's life as he retreated into the shadows with his stolen spark. As the days passed, the weight of the secret began to transform Thomas Harvey himself. He was no longer the respected chief pathologist of a prestigious institution. He was a man living in the periphery of his own profession. The ethical rupture had effectively severed his connection to the scientific establishment he hoped to serve. He began to view himself as the lone guardian of a sacred flame, a man tasked with protecting the physical essence of relativity from a world that was not yet ready to understand it. The blue shadows of the laboratory seemed to follow him wherever he went, a constant reminder of the moment he chose the tissue over the truth. The brain was now divided into segments, prepared for a journey that would take it through the mundane landscapes of America, hidden in cardboard boxes and cider jars. The rupture was complete. The man who had sought to save science had instead created a legacy of controversy that would haunt the annals of medicine forever. The silence of the jar was the only answer to the many questions of morality that remained unresolved. A silent testimony to the day a doctor traded his integrity for a piece of eternity. The physical reality of Einstein's brain in the days following the autopsy was not one of high-tech preservation or secure vaults, but rather a series of mundane and almost insulting improvisations. Once Dr. Thomas Harvey had successfully extracted the organ and placed it in its initial bath of formaldehyde, the question of where to hide such a monumental object became a pressing and dangerous problem. He could no longer leave it in the pathology lab where curiosity or routine inspections might reveal his transgression. Harvey decided to take the brain into his own private world, transforming it from a medical specimen into a clandestine cargo that would never again know the stability of a formal institution. He chose a container that was as far removed from scientific prestige as possible, a simple, unassuming wooden box originally meant for carrying cider bottles. This box was not reinforced with lead or protected by electronic locks. It was merely a shell of cheap timber, a vessel for a secret that was quickly becoming the center of Harvey's universe. Inside this box, the glass jars containing the brain were nestled amidst ordinary household items, hidden beneath the surface of a life that was beginning to unravel. The initial hiding place within Harvey's own home was even more bizarre and unsettling. He decided to store the cider box beneath a beer cooler in his office, believing that the most famous mind of the 20th century would be safe if it was hidden in the most unremarkable of places. This was the beginning of the brain's existence as a ghostly tenant, a silent observer to the domestic struggles and the growing isolation of its guardian. The jars were not labeled with Einstein's name. They were kept in a state of clinical anonymity to the outside world, while to Harvey, they pulsed with a light that only he could perceive. He would spend hours in the quiet blue shadows of his office, staring at the box, contemplating the immense responsibility he had seized for himself. The brain was now in a state of suspension, both physically and historically. It was no longer a part of the man who had changed the world, and it was not yet a part of the scientific literature that Harvey had promised it would serve. It was a relic in waiting, trapped in a container that symbolized the deep disconnect between Harvey's lofty ideals and his increasingly desperate reality. As the secret grew heavier, the logistical challenges of maintaining such a specimen became a constant source of anxiety. Formaldehyde is a volatile and pungent substance, and the smell of the preservation fluid began to permeate the small spaces where the box was kept, serving as a constant olfactory reminder of the stolen tissue. Harvey had to ensure that the fluid levels remained constant and that the jars were not disturbed during the routine movements of his household. He became a man obsessed with the integrity of a wooden box, a man whose social and professional interactions were now filtered through the lens of a hidden truth. The cider box was not just a container. It was a mobile sanctuary for a spark of genius that Harvey believed he alone could protect. He began to distance himself from his colleagues and his friends, fearing that any close association might lead to the discovery of his cargo. The blue light of his desk lamp became his only companion as he meticulously checked the seals on the jars, ensuring that the physical engine of relativity remained intact in its bath of chemicals. This period of secrecy marked the death of Harvey's conventional career and the birth of his life as a wanderer. The brain was safe for the moment, but its journey was only beginning. The transition from a hospital basement to a cider box under a cooler was the first step in a nomadic odyssey that would eventually see the brain travel thousands of miles across the American landscape. Always hidden, always silent, and always accompanied by the man who had traded his soul for its preservation. The decision to seize the engine of modern physics did not bring Thomas Harvey the scientific glory he had imagined, but instead triggered a slow, agonizing disintegration of his professional and personal existence. Shortly after the shaky permission was granted by Albert Einstein, the administrative walls of Princeton Hospital began to close in on the man who had once been their chief pathologist. The hospital board was not interested in the potential secrets of glial cells or the architecture of the parietal lobe. They were focused on the breach of protocol and the immense liability Harvey had invited into their halls. In the cold blue light of the administrative offices, Harvey was confronted with the reality of his choice. He was no longer seen as a guardian of science, but as a liability who had tarnished the reputation of a prestigious institution. His dismissal was swift and absolute, a clean surgical cut that removed him from the only world he had ever known. He walked out of the hospital for the last time, carrying not just his belongings, but the heavy, glass-bound secret that was now the only anchor in his drifting life. The isolation that followed was as thick and suffocating as the formaldehyde in which the brain was suspended. As Harvey retreated to his home, the cider box beneath the cooler became the silent center of his domestic environment, a presence that his wife found increasingly unbearable. The theft had not just fractured his career, it had shattered the trust within his marriage. The air in their home became heavy with unspoken accusations, and the pungent, chemical scent of preservation fluid that seemed to leak from Harvey's very pores. He was a man possessed, spending his nights in the dim blue shadows of his study, checking the jars, obsessing over the integrity of the tissue while his own life was falling apart around him. His wife eventually gave him an ultimatum: the brain or his family. But for Harvey, there was no longer a choice. He had traded his integrity for a piece of eternity, and he could not let go of the only thing that gave his ruined life a sense of purpose. The divorce was as cold and clinical as the autopsy that had started it all, leaving Harvey alone in a house that now felt like a mausoleum for his lost ambitions. His professional reputation in the wider scientific community was equally fractured. While he had promised to share the brain with the world's leading researchers, he found himself unable to initiate the process with the rigor and transparency required by the academic establishment. He became a ghost in the annals of medicine, a man who held the most valuable biological specimen in history, but lacked the institutional support to analyze it. He attempted to reach out to various universities, but his lack of a formal position and the controversial nature of his acquisition made him a pariah. The blue light of his lonely nights was filled with the drafting of letters that were often ignored or met with polite skepticism. He was no longer a doctor. He was a wanderer with a stolen spark, a man whose identity was now entirely subsumed by the organ he guarded. The disintegration was total, socially, professionally, and psychologically. He began to feel that the brain was not just a specimen, but a burden that demanded his total devotion, a silent master that required him to sacrifice everything he once held dear. As his financial resources began to dwindle, Harvey realized that he could no longer stay in Princeton. The town was filled with the echoes of his failure and the constant fear that the authorities might eventually reconsider their hands-off approach to his cargo. He packed his few remaining possessions into his car, placing the cider box in the trunk with a reverence that bordered on the religious. The transition to a nomadic life was the final stage of his disintegration. He was now a man on the road, moving through the vast, indifferent landscapes of America with a secret that was both his greatest treasure and his most heavy chain. The blue shadows of the highway at dusk became his new laboratory, the hum of the tires his only music. He was a man who had sought to understand the mind of a genius, but had ended up losing his own place in the world. The disintegration of Dr. Thomas Harvey was the price he paid for a moment of unauthorized curiosity, a slow descent into a life where the only thing that remained constant was the silent, gray presence in the jar. He had become a footnote in the history of the man he had violated, a tragic figure who believed he was serving science while he was actually drowning in the depths of his own obsession. The secret of the stolen mind could not remain buried in the shadows of a basement morgue or beneath a beer cooler forever. And the morning the world finally learned of Thomas Harvey's transgression was a moment of profound global shock. It began not with a formal announcement, but with a slow leak of information that eventually reached the front pages of the world's most influential newspapers. On the morning of April 20, 1955, the public was confronted with a headline that seemed to belong to the realm of Gothic horror rather than modern science. The New York Times and other major outlets reported that the brain of Albert Einstein had been removed during the autopsy and was now in the possession of the hospital's pathologist. This was the morning of discovery, a day that shattered the carefully maintained image of the peaceful transition Einstein had desired. The news acted like a lightning bolt through the scientific community and the general public alike, stripping away the layers of privacy that the Einstein family had tried so hard to preserve. In the blue light of early morning cafes and newsstands across America, people read the accounts with a mixture of morbid fascination and deep moral revulsion. The initial reaction from the hospital administration was one of absolute panic and frantic damage control. They had hoped to keep the matter quiet while they dealt with Harvey internally, but once the headlines were in the hands of the public, the pressure became unbearable. The board members at Princeton Hospital found themselves besieged by reporters and outraged citizens who wanted to know how such a violation could have occurred in a prestigious institution. They held emergency meetings in rooms filled with the heavy smoke of cigarettes and the cold, blue shadows of a reputation in freefall. To the hospital, this was not a scientific breakthrough. It was a catastrophic failure of ethics and supervision. They were desperate to distance themselves from Harvey, painting him as a rogue actor who had operated entirely on his own. Yet, the more they tried to explain, the more the mystery deepened. The public was captivated by the image of the world's greatest brain being held by a single man in a jar, a biological relic that had been severed from the man who defined the 20th century. The morning of discovery marked the moment when the brain became a public object, a piece of shared human heritage that was being fought over in the court of public opinion. For Thomas Harvey, this morning was the beginning of his transformation from a quiet pathologist into a figure of intense public scrutiny. He had expected the world to understand his motives, believing that the scientific value of the brain was so immense that any ethical breach would be immediately forgiven. He was wrong. While some scientists were indeed intrigued by the possibility of studying the brain, the overwhelming majority of the response was one of condemnation. He found himself at the center of a media storm that he was entirely unprepared to handle. His phone rang incessantly in the blue light of his office, and reporters camped outside his home, seeking a statement or a glimpse of the cider box. Harvey stood his ground with a stubborn and quiet intensity, repeating his promise that the brain would only be used for the benefit of humanity. He was a man who truly believed he had saved a treasure from the furnace. But as he looked out his window at the crowds gathering, he began to realize that the world viewed him not as a savior, but as a thief of a legend's piece. The discovery of his secret had turned his life into a permanent spectacle, a drama where he was the protagonist of a story he no longer controlled. This morning also marked the first time the scientific community had to grapple with the reality of what Harvey had done. Letters and telegrams began to arrive from laboratories around the world, some offering support and requesting samples, while others issued stern warnings about the legality of his actions. The morning of discovery forced a conversation about the ownership of the human body that had never been settled. Does the physical seat of intelligence belong to the person who owned it, or to the species that benefited from its thoughts? In the cold blue shadows of university libraries and research centers, scholars debated the implications of Harvey's theft. They looked at the photographs of Einstein that appeared alongside the shocking headlines, and wondered if the secret of the universe was indeed hidden in the tissue that Harvey now guarded so jealously. The discovery had opened a door that could never be closed, and the brain of the man who saw into the heart of stars was now a permanent fixture in the collective consciousness of the world. As the sun rose higher on that fateful morning, the legacy of Albert Einstein was forever changed. No longer just a collection of theories and equations, but a physical mystery that would be hunted and studied for the next half-century. The weight of the world's gaze had shifted from the legacy of a genius to the hands of a man who held a stolen relic, and the focal point of this tension was a small, dimly lit office where a grieving son prepared to face the violator of his father's final piece. The air in the room was thick with the scent of old paper and the cold, blue shadows of a late April evening. Hans Albert Einstein, a man who had lived his entire life in the immense shadow of his father's intellect, now found himself tasked with protecting what remained of that father's dignity. Across from him sat Dr. Thomas Harvey, the man who had performed the unauthorized extraction, looking not like a criminal, but like a man who believed he was holding the physical keys to the salvation of human knowledge. This was the meeting that would decide the fate of Einstein's brain, whether it would be returned to the elements as a whole or remain a fragmented prisoner of science. Hans Albert's presence in that office was a manifestation of deep personal betrayal and the profound sense of loss that follows the death of a titan. He knew his father's mind better than any equation could describe, and he knew with absolute certainty that the man who defined relativity had wanted nothing more than to disappear quietly into the cosmos. To Hans Albert, the removal of the brain was not a scientific endeavor. It was a crude desecration of a private life that had already been shared too much with the public. He looked at Harvey through the blue haze of the office light, seeing a man driven by a kind of madness that masqueraded as duty. The silence between them was a physical presence, a heavy void where the ethics of medicine and the rights of the family collided with a violent force. Hans Albert demanded answers, his voice low and trembling with the weight of a son's grief and a protector's rage. Harvey, however, did not flinch. He did not offer the humble apologies of a man caught in a mistake. Instead, he spoke with the quiet, almost hypnotic fervor of a true believer. He painted a picture of a future where the secrets of the universe were unlocked not by the stars, but by the neurons of the man who had seen them so clearly. He argued that Einstein's brain was no longer the property of one family, but a gift to the entire human species that could not be allowed to perish. He spoke of the glial cells, the density of the cortex, and the mysteries of the parietal lobe with a passion that seemed to transcend the clinical setting. To Harvey, the brain was a sacred relic that held the answer to the greatest question of all: what makes a genius? He pleaded with Hans Albert with a desperate intensity, promising that the brain would never be a spectacle, never a trophy, but only an object of the most rigorous and respectful scientific investigation. The blue shadows seemed to stretch and deepen as Hans Albert listened to the man who had robbed his father's corpse. He was caught in an impossible dilemma. To deny Harvey's request was to fulfill his father's last wish and restore a measure of peace, but it was also to take upon himself the responsibility of destroying a specimen that the world believed was paja bisalmes. He saw the headlines in his mind, the accusations that the family was holding back the progress of science. He saw the obsession in Harvey's eyes and realized that the man would likely never let go of the jar regardless of the legalities. The room felt like a chamber where history was being bargained for in whispers. After hours of heavy silence and circular arguments, the exhaustion of grief began to take its toll. Hans Albert realized that the secret was already out, the violation was already complete, and the brain was already a separate entity from the man he had loved. In a moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life, Hans Albert Einstein granted a reluctant, retroactive permission. It was not an endorsement of Harvey's actions, but a surrender to the overwhelming pressure of a world that demanded a piece of his father. He made Harvey swear a solemn oath that the brain would only ever be used for scientific research, and that the findings would be published in the world's leading journals for the benefit of all mankind. This was the agreement that allowed the brain to remain in the cider box, the pact that turned a theft into a scientific project in the eyes of the public. As Hans Albert walked out into the cold blue night of Princeton, he felt a part of his father's peace slip away forever. He had protected the memory, but the physical mind was now in the hands of a wanderer. The permission was the final seal on Harvey's new life as the guardian of a stolen spark, a decision that would lead to decades of mystery, silence, and the slow disintegration of the very science it was meant to serve. The transition from a fixed existence in Princeton to a life of drifting across the vast American landscape marked the beginning of the most surreal chapter in the history of Albert Einstein's physical remains. With the shaky permission of Hans Albert tucked away like a defensive shield, Dr. Thomas Harvey packed his few remaining worldly possessions into the cramped interior of his car. He was a man who had lost his institution, his professional standing, and the stability of his home, yet he felt a strange, distorted sense of freedom as he turned the key in the ignition. The engine of the Buick Skylark hummed to life in the cool blue shadows of a damp morning, a sound that would become the background music for a journey spanning thousands of miles. In the trunk of that car, hidden beneath a pile of clothes and unremarkable boxes, sat the cider box containing the glass jars. The physical seat of the theory of relativity was no longer in a lab. It was a passenger on the highways of a nation that was moving into the height of the Cold War. As Harvey drove away from the familiar streets of New Jersey, he entered a world of endless asphalt and flickering neon signs that felt as cold and indifferent as the formaldehyde in the jars. The American highway at night became his laboratory, a space defined by the deep blue glow of the dashboard lights and the lonely beams of his headlights cutting through the darkness. He traveled through small towns and vast prairies, staying in nondescript motels where he would carry the cider box into his room with a reverence that most would reserve for a sleeping child. He avoided the gaze of strangers, fearing that the secret in the box might somehow be visible to those he encountered at gas stations or roadside diners. To the world, he was just another traveler moving across the continent, but to himself, he was a courier of the infinite. the lone guardian of a biological spark that had once ignited the fires of modern physics. The logistics of this nomadic existence were a constant source of quiet anxiety and meticulous planning. Harvey had to ensure that the jars were not subjected to the violent vibrations of the road or the extreme temperature changes of the American climate. He would check the seals in the dim blue light of motel bathrooms, ensuring that the preservation fluid had not leaked and that the segments of brain remained submerged in their chemical bath. He began to feel a profound connection to the tissue, a sense that he and the brain were now two fragments of the same shattered life, wandering together through a world that had forgotten them both. This was the journey across America, a pilgrimage without a destination, where the sacred and the mundane were forced into a bizarre coexistence in the back of a moving vehicle. The brain that had visualized the motion of planets was now subject to the bumps and turns of a Kansas highway, a silent witness to the changing landscapes of a country it had once called home. As the weeks turned into months, the weight of the cargo seemed to grow heavier even as Harvey became more accustomed to the life of a wanderer. He eventually settled in various locations, Kansas, Missouri, and eventually California, moving his prize from one unremarkable basement to another. In each new town, he would find a quiet place for the cider box, often hiding it behind domestic items or beneath the floorboards of his temporary residences. He became a ghost in his own profession, taking menial jobs in medical labs or working in factories to sustain himself while the brain remained his silent priority. The blue shadows of the American Midwest became his sanctuary, a place where he could hide from the scrutiny of the media and the scientific establishment. The journey was not just a physical movement across space. It was a descent into a clandestine existence where the only thing that remained constant was the presence of the jars. The brain of the man who redefined time was now a prisoner of a man who was running out of it, a nomad in a box, waiting for a breakthrough that Harvey was increasingly unable to provide. The most bizarre and haunting chapter of Einstein's afterlife was not spent in a high-tech research facility, but in the dark, cramped confines of a car's trunk. Dr. Thomas Harvey's Buick Skylark became the mobile crypt for the 20th century's most important mind. As he crisscrossed the American continent, moving from town to town in a restless search for purpose and anonymity, the brain traveled with him, a silent passenger hidden beneath the mundane clutter of a wandering life. The trunk of the Skylark was a chaotic space filled with the artifacts of his nomadic existence: spare tires, old road maps, discarded coffee cups, and crumpled clothing. Yet, amidst this ordinary disarray, sat the cider box, a simple wooden crate that held the fragmented genius of the man who had revolutionized our understanding of light and gravity. Harvey's relationship with the brain during this period was one of obsessive guardianship. He would check on the box frequently, often in the quiet hours of the night, illuminated only by the dim blue glow of a gas station's neon sign or the pale light of a roadside motel's parking lot. He lived in constant fear of theft or discovery, his eyes always scanning the surroundings, his demeanor one of nervous vigilance. The brain had become more than just a scientific specimen to him. It was his life's anchor, the only thing that gave his increasingly fragmented world a sense of profound meaning. He would sometimes remove one of the glass jars from the box and hold it up to the light, his face bathed in the cool, blue reflection of the formaldehyde as he stared at the gray matter within, perhaps hoping to see a spark of the brilliance that had once resided there. These were private rituals, moments of connection between a disgraced pathologist and a silent relic, hidden from the rest of the world by the curved metal of a car's trunk. The journey was a strange pilgrimage through the heart of America. The brain that had envisioned the curvature of the cosmos was now subject to the mundane vibrations of the highway, the sharp turns of mountain roads, and the endless expanse of the Great Plains. It passed through cities and forgotten towns, a silent witness to the changing cultural landscape of the 1960s and 70s. Harvey's Buick became a time capsule on wheels, carrying the physical history of physics through a world that was increasingly obsessed with the space race and the very technologies that Einstein's theories had made possible. The irony was palpable. The man who had unlocked the secrets of the atom was now being driven around in a machine powered by fossil fuels, his remains stored in a box originally made for apple cider. As the years turned into decades, the car and its contents began to show the signs of age. The Buick developed rust and mechanical issues, but Harvey refused to abandon the vehicle that had served as his sanctuary and transport for so long. The cider box itself became worn, the wood stained and chipped, a testament to the thousands of miles it had traveled. Yet, inside the box, the jars remained sealed, their contents preserved in the amber-like stasis of formaldehyde. The blue shadows of the trunk seemed to deepen with time, becoming a permanent twilight in which the brain resided. Harvey's nomadic life was a testament to his devotion, however misguided, to the promise he had made. He had become the keeper of a secret that defined him, a man who drove through the night with the weight of the world's curiosity hidden in his trunk, a guardian of a stolen genius who was both his master and his prisoner in the unending American road trip. The nomadic existence of Albert Einstein's brain had transformed it from a unified biological organ into a fragmented collection of stories, microscopic samples, and scattered scientific curiosity. As Dr. Thomas Harvey settled into a semi-permanent life in Wichita, Kansas, the cider box became a silent fixture in his modest home, yet its contents were far from static or forgotten. He had begun to fulfill his promise to Hans Albert Einstein in a way that was as unconventional and unsettling as the theft itself. He did not present the brain to a single prestigious university or a major research hospital for a comprehensive and coordinated study. Instead, he began to act as a self-appointed scientific distributor, mailing small fragments of the genius to various researchers who had caught his interest through their published works or personal reputations. These pieces, some as small as a postage stamp and no thicker than a few millimeters, were carefully sliced from the larger blocks with a silver-bladed microtome and placed in individual vials of formaldehyde. The brain was no longer a single whole. It was slowly becoming a constellation of samples scattered across the laboratories of the world, a dispersed mind in a literal sense. The logistics of this distribution were handled with a mixture of clinical precision and amateur secrecy that defined Harvey's entire life. He would sit at his wooden desk in the deepening blue shadows of the evening, the only light coming from a small desk lamp that cast long, sharp shadows against the walls of his study. He would meticulously label each vial with a small tag, preparing them for shipment in ordinary cardboard boxes that looked no different from any other package moving through the American postal system. He would write long, formal letters to neuroanatomists, pathologists, and brain researchers, offering them a piece of history in exchange for their expertise and a promise of shared data. These letters were written with a quiet humility that often belied the sheer audacity of his possession. He spoke of the brain not as his own personal property, but as a trust that he was now opening to the international scientific community for the betterment of mankind. The researchers who received these unexpected packages were often struck by the surreal and macabre nature of the arrival. In the sterile light of their own professional laboratories, they would open a simple box to find a piece of the man who had redefined the very fabric of the universe. It was a moment of profound scientific gravity, as the first microscopic slides were prepared from these nomadic fragments, and the first official glimpses into Einstein's unique neural architecture were recorded in laboratory notebooks. Yet, this decentralized process was fraught with risk, irregularity, and the inevitable loss that comes with such a disorganized method. Some segments of the brain were reportedly lost in the mail, while others were stored in filing cabinets and forgotten for years as researchers moved on to other projects or passed away themselves. Some pieces were even traded like scientific curiosities among colleagues, further scattering the physical remains of the genius. Harvey maintained a meticulous set of handwritten logs in his notebooks, tracking where each piece had gone and what findings had been reported back to him. But the unified and coherent narrative of the brain's anatomy was increasingly lost in the fragmentation. It was a decentralized archive of brilliance, held together only by Harvey's unwavering and perhaps delusional belief that the ultimate secret of the mind was still there, waiting to be discovered in the very next slice or the next vial. The blue shadows of his Wichita study seemed to deepen as the blocks of the brain within the cider box grew fewer and fewer, the physical organs slowly disappearing into the envelopes and packages he sent away to far-flung destinations. He was literally giving away the physical engine of the man he had once guarded so zealously, fragment by fragment, until the brain became as much of a legend and a ghost in the scientific community as it was in the public imagination. The nomadic relic was now a global presence, a silent witness under microscopes in diverse and distant cities, while Harvey himself remained in his quiet and lonely exile, watching the physical fragments of his stolen treasure drift away into the annals of history. He lived in a state of perpetual waiting, hoping that one of these scattered seeds would finally bloom into the breakthrough that would justify his original crime. The weight of the jars was lighter now, but the weight of the mystery remained as heavy and blue as the Kansas sky at dusk. The physical act of dividing the brain of Albert Einstein was not a task performed with the haste of a thief, but with the agonizing precision of a man who believed he was dissecting the fabric of time itself. Dr. Thomas Harvey knew that to preserve the mind for the future, he had to dismantle it in the present, turning a singular biological miracle into a mapped and numbered grid of data. In the quiet blue hours of his laboratory workspace, surrounded by the scent of chemicals and the weight of his secret, he prepared the microtome, a silver-bladed instrument of absolute accuracy. This was the moment where the engine of relativity was physically reduced to its constituent parts. The brain, which had once visualized the curvature of space-time and the hidden dance of atoms, was now a silent mass of tissue waiting to be sliced into thin, translucent wafers of history. Harvey moved with a mechanical grace, his every movement a reflection of the profound gravity of the situation. He understood that each cut was final, and that any error would be an irreversible loss to the collective knowledge of mankind. The room was filled with a sharp, electric blue light that glinted off the polished metal of the blades, creating an atmosphere of clinical coldness and deep scientific mystery. Before the actual slicing could begin, the brain had to undergo a process of stabilization. Harvey used a technique involving celloidin, a tough, transparent substance that would provide the necessary support for the soft tissue as it was being cut. He spent days carefully embedding the brain in this material, watching as the clear liquid slowly hardened around the folds and fissures of the genius. This was a period of intense anticipation, a time when Harvey was essentially casting the thoughts of Einstein into a permanent mold. He worked in a state of hyperfocus, oblivious to the world outside his window, focused entirely on the physical preservation of the mind. The celloidin provided a structural integrity that allowed for microscopic precision, ensuring that the relationship between neurons and glial cells would be maintained even as the brain was divided. The chemical scent of the lab became his constant companion, a pungent reminder of the transformation he was conducting. To Harvey, this was not merely a medical procedure. It was a ritual of sanctification, a way to turn the mortal remains of a man into an eternal archive of intelligence. When the moment of the first cut finally arrived, the silence in the lab was so absolute that the sliding of the microtome blade sounded like a thunderclap. Harvey moved the silver blade with a steady hand, watching as the first thin slice of the frontal lobe was peeled away. It was a moment of profound revelation and terrifying responsibility. He was seeing the internal architecture of brilliance, the hidden structures that had allowed Einstein to perceive the universe in a way no human had ever done before. He proceeded to divide the entire brain into 240 individual blocks, each one carefully numbered and mapped according to a complex grid system he had designed. He was effectively creating a physical atlas of the mind, a three-dimensional puzzle that could be studied piece by piece. Each block was then placed in its own individual vial of formaldehyde, becoming a separate entity in the vast collection of fragments Harvey was building. The process was slow and methodical, taking months to complete as he meticulously documented every slice and every block. The atmosphere of the lab during this time was dominated by a heavy, blue solitude. Harvey worked late into the night, his only company the silent segments of the brain and the cold glow of his equipment. He began to feel that the 240 blocks were not just pieces of tissue, but 240 separate mysteries waiting to be solved. He would hold the blocks up to the light, staring at the intricate patterns of the cortex and the deep grooves of the fissures, looking for the secret that he believed was hidden within. He was a man obsessed with the physical basis of thought, a scientist who believed that the soul could be quantified if only the slices were thin enough. The transformation was complete. The brain of Albert Einstein was no longer a whole, functioning organ but a fragmented archive stored in jars. Harvey had successfully dismantled the engine of relativity, turning the most famous mind in history into a collection of nomadic relics that would soon be scattered across the globe. The weight of his task was immense, but the blue light of the lab provided a sense of calm and purpose that sustained him through the long, lonely hours of his self-imposed mission. He had turned a man's last wish into a scientific project, and now he held the results in 240 glass vials, waiting for the world to notice the treasure he had stolen. The transformation of Albert Einstein's brain from a singular biological entity into a sprawling archive of data was completed in the quiet solitude of Thomas Harvey's laboratory, a process that yielded exactly 240 individual blocks of tissue. This was the physical manifestation of Harvey's obsession, a grand attempt to reduce the abstract concept of genius into tangible, manageable units that could be cataloged and stored. Each block was roughly the size of a sugar cube, embedded within the clear, amber-like substance of celloidin, which held the delicate neural architecture firmly in place. These miniature monuments to human thought were no longer recognizable as parts of a brain. They were clinical specimens, devoid of the recognizable form of gyri and sulci that define the human cortex. Harvey had effectively disassembled the engine of relativity, turning the biological hardware that had conceived curved space-time into a series of numbered artifacts. The room where this archive was kept was bathed in a perpetual twilight of blue shadows, a quiet sanctuary where the only sound was the scratching of Harvey's pen as he meticulously labeled each jar. The organization of these 240 blocks was a feat of obsessive cartography. Harvey created a master map of the brain, assigning a unique coordinate and number to every section he had removed. This was not just a random collection of tissue. It was a structured library of the mind, a physical atlas where every region, from the prefrontal cortex responsible for complex planning to the parietal lobes involved in spatial reasoning, could be located and studied in isolation. Harvey viewed himself as the librarian of this extraordinary collection, the keeper of a biological Alexandria that contained the secrets of the universe. He spent countless hours in the dim blue glow of his workspace, organizing and reorganizing the jars, ensuring that the numerical sequence was perfect, as if the order of the blocks itself held some hidden meaning. The sheer volume of the collection was overwhelming, rows upon rows of identical glass jars, each containing a pale, suspended fragment of the man who had changed history. The visual impact of these 240 jars was profound, a testament to the lengths one man would go to possess and understand the ununderstandable. To the outside world, these blocks were controversial relics of a stolen brain, but to Harvey, they were the seeds of future scientific revolutions. He believed that by dividing the brain into such precise segments, he was making it accessible to the world's greatest scientific minds. He envisioned a future where researchers would request specific blocks based on his master map, allowing for highly targeted studies of specific brain regions. Yet, as the jars accumulated on his shelves, casting long, distorted blue reflections on the walls, they also represented a profound fragmentation. The holistic brilliance of Einstein, the ability to synthesize vast amounts of information into simple, elegant theories, was now lost in a sea of disconnected parts. Harvey had created a puzzle with 240 pieces, but he had no idea how to put them back together to form the picture of genius. The blocks were silent, holding their secrets within the dense lattice of neurons and glial cells, waiting for a technology that did not yet exist. The existence of the 240 blocks marked a permanent shift in the trajectory of Einstein's remains. The brain could never again be a whole entity. Its destruction was irreversible. Harvey's life became defined by the maintenance of this archive. He was no longer just moving a cider box trunk to trunk. He was the stationary guardian of a vast biological database. The weight of this responsibility was immense, a constant pressure to ensure that not a single block was lost or damaged. In the quiet moments of the night, surrounded by the blue luminescence of the jars, Harvey would sometimes wonder if he had preserved the genius or merely imprisoned it in glass. The 240 blocks were his legacy, a monumental achievement of dissection and preservation that would forever link his name with Einstein's, not as a collaborator, but as the man who dared to slice the mind of the century into pieces in a desperate attempt to understand how it worked. The quest to preserve the brain of Albert Einstein was not merely a matter of physical storage, but a continuous and high-stakes battle against the fundamental laws of biological decay. At the center of this battle was a single chemical compound, formaldehyde. This pungent, colorless gas, dissolved in water to create formalin, became the medium through which Dr. Thomas Harvey attempted to grant the genius a form of chemical immortality. Formaldehyde is a master of molecular manipulation. It works by creating bridges between protein molecules, effectively freezing the cellular structure in a state of rigid stasis. When Harvey submerged the 240 blocks into the glass jars, he was not just protecting them from the air. He was initiating a chemical transformation that turned the once fluid and living tissue into a biological mummy. The neurons that had once fired with the lightning of revolutionary thought were now locked in a lattice of carbon and nitrogen, prevented from breaking down by the very substance that made them too toxic for bacteria to consume. The atmosphere of Harvey's nomadic laboratory was always defined by the sharp, unmistakable scent of this fluid, a smell that sticks to the back of the throat and lingers in the memory like a ghost. In the blue light of his workspace, the jars did not just contain tissue. They contained a version of time that had been chemically arrested, a silent defiance of the entropy that claims every other living thing. Maintaining this state of immortality was an agonizingly meticulous task that consumed decades of Harvey's life. Formaldehyde is a volatile substance, prone to evaporation and degradation over long periods. Harvey lived in a state of perpetual vigilance, constantly checking the levels of the fluid in each of the 240 vials. He knew that if the fluid dropped too low, exposing the tissue to the air, the delicate neural architecture would begin to shrivel and oxidize, destroying the very secrets he had sacrificed his career to save. In the quiet, blue hours of the night, he would perform the ritual of the chemical exchange. He would carefully open the jars, one by one, and replace the old, yellowing formalin with a fresh, clear solution. This was a dangerous dance with toxicity, as the fumes filled the small spaces of his temporary homes. Yet Harvey performed it with the reverence of a high priest tending to a sacred flame. He became an expert in the concentrations and the pH levels required to keep the tissue supple and stable. He was no longer just a pathologist. He was a conservator of a biological relic, a man whose primary relationship was with a collection of glass jars and the clear liquid that kept the past from disappearing into the dust of the present. The jars reflected the blue light of his desk lamp, casting long, shimmering patterns on the walls that seemed to pulse with the rhythmic necessity of his task. The irony of this chemical immortality was that it rendered the brain both eternally preserved and functionally dead. While the formaldehyde protected the structure of the cells, it also cross-linked the proteins so thoroughly that it made extracting DNA or analyzing delicate neurotransmitters nearly impossible for the technology of the mid-20th century. The brain was a museum piece, a visual record of a mind that could no longer be queried. Harvey had succeeded in stopping time, but in doing so, he had created a paradox. The more he preserved the tissue, the more he locked away its secrets behind a wall of hardened chemistry. He would stare at the blocks in the jars, watching as they floated in the blue-tinted formalin, wondering if the secrets of relativity were still there, hidden within the molecular cages he had helped to build. He was a man who had traded the warmth of human connection for the cold, sterile embrace of formaldehyde, believing that the physical remains of genius were worth more than the integrity of his own life. The jars became his world, a miniature universe of 240 stars suspended in a sea of chemicals, waiting for a future that might never arrive. The immortality he had sought for Einstein was a silent and lonely one, a state of being that existed only in the shadows of the American Midwest, held together by the constant and desperate maintenance of a man who was running out of time himself. As the years stretched into decades, the relationship between the pathologist and the preservative became a symbiotic tragedy. Harvey's clothes, his car, and his skin began to carry the permanent scent of the lab, an olfactory marker of his obsession. He became a nomad of the highways, carrying his glass-bound charges through heat waves and blizzards, always ensuring that the thermal stability of the jars was maintained. He understood that even a slight change in temperature could affect the solubility of the formaldehyde, potentially causing the celluloid to cloud or the tissue to swell. He was a guardian of the molecular level, a scientist who had retreated from the grand theories of physics to the microscopic reality of chemical stasis. The blue shadows of his life were filled with the constant hum of the ventilation fans he used to clear the fumes, a sound that replaced the dialogue of his lost profession. He was the lone keeper of a biological time capsule, a man who believed that as long as the fluid remained clear and the jars remained sealed, the genius of Albert Einstein would never truly die. The formaldehydic immortality was a heavy burden, a crystalline weight that he carried with a mixture of pride and despair, a silent testimony to the day he chose the preservation of the past over the possibilities of the future. The weight of being the sole protector of Albert Einstein's physical mind was a burden that eventually reshaped the very architecture of Thomas Harvey's soul, turning a once promising career into a lifelong exercise in silent vigilance and profound isolation. As the decades passed, the initial excitement of his scientific rebellion was replaced by a heavy, grinding responsibility that required him to live on the margins of society. He was a man who carried a secret that the world was constantly trying to pry from his hands, and the effort to keep it hidden turned his life into a series of strategic retreats and quiet disappearances. The burden was not just the physical weight of the glass jars or the cider box, but the psychological pressure of knowing that he alone held the key to a mystery that millions of people were fascinated by. In the blue light of his solitary evenings, Harvey would often find himself staring at the jars, feeling the crushing gravity of his choice. He had traded the warmth of a normal life, a stable home, a respected position, and the companionship of his peers for the cold, sterile company of 240 blocks of human tissue. This was the silent guardian's burden, a price paid in the currency of loneliness and the slow erosion of his own identity. Harvey's existence became defined by a strange paradox. He was the most famous pathologist in the world who no one could find. He moved through the landscapes of the American Midwest like a ghost, taking jobs that were far below his qualifications just to stay under the radar of the media and the scientific establishment. He worked as a medical supervisor in a plastics factory in Kansas, and later as a process control worker in a light bulb plant, always keeping the cider box close and the jars sealed. To his coworkers, he was just a quiet, somewhat eccentric old man who kept to himself, but within the private sanctuary of his mind, he was the high priest of relativity. The burden of the secret meant that he could never truly connect with those around him. Every friendship was a potential risk, every conversation a minefield where a single slip of the tongue could reveal his hidden cargo. He lived in a state of permanent taiakas, his eyes always scanning for the telltale signs of a reporter or a government official. The deep blue shadows of his various apartments became his only true confidants, the places where he could finally lower his guard and commune with the remains of the man who had seen into the heart of the sun. The psychological toll of this burden was evident in the way Harvey's own personality began to fragment and fade. He became a man of few words, his speech as measured and clinical as the notes in his lab journals. He seemed to be living in a different time dimension than the rest of the world, a dimension where the only thing that mattered was the preservation of the past. He felt a profound sense of duty to Einstein, a duty that bordered on the religious, believing that he had been chosen by fate to save the brain from the flames. This belief provided him with a sense of purpose, but it also blinded him to the reality of his own decline. He was a guardian who was slowly being consumed by the very thing he was protecting. The brain was not just a specimen in a jar. It was a silent master that demanded his total devotion and his total silence. He carried the weight of the 20th century in the trunk of his car, and the pressure of that history was enough to crush any hope of a conventional future. As he aged, the burden of the secret began to intersect with the reality of his own mortality. He began to wonder what would happen to the brain after he was gone. Who would take over the watch? Who could be trusted with the 240 fragments of genius? These questions filled the long, blue hours of his retirement with a new kind of anxiety, He had spent his life keeping the world away from the brain, but now he realized that he had to find a way to return it to the world without betraying the promise he had made to Hans Albert Einstein. The burden was reaching its final, most difficult stage, the transition from guardian to deliverer. He was a man who had lived in the shadows for so long that the prospect of stepping back into the light was terrifying. Yet, he knew that the secret could not die with him. The weight of the jars was still there, a constant presence in his modest apartment, a silent testimony to the day he chose a piece of eternity over the comfort of a normal life. Thomas Harvey was the silent guardian of a stolen spark, a man who had sacrificed everything to ensure that the mind that redefined the universe would never truly be forgotten, even if he had to lose himself in the process. The final chapter of the brain's odyssey began in the quiet, blue-tinted twilight of Thomas Harvey's old age, when the realization that he could not guard the secret forever finally overtook him. After decades of silence and shadow, he understood that the burden of the jars was too great to be carried into the grave. He needed to find a way to return the fragments of genius to the world, to fulfill the promise he had made to Hans Albert Einstein, and to ensure that the brain would not be lost to history. The decision to resurface was not made with a grand announcement, but with the quiet desperation of a man running out of time. He began to reach out, not to the scientific establishment that had shunned him, but to a journalist who had tracked him down, Michael Paterniti. This connection was the bridge between Harvey's clandestine world and the public that had been waiting for news of the stolen brain for over 40 years. It was a tentative alliance, built on a fragile trust and a shared sense of the surreal nature of their mission. Harvey's modest apartment in Lawrence, Kansas, once a sanctuary of secrecy, became the staging ground for the brain's final journey. The cider box was brought out from its hiding place. The jars were checked one last time, and the blue light of the desk lamp seemed to glow with the anticipation of a long-delayed revelation. The journey Harvey proposed was a symbolic pilgrimage, a cross-country drive from Kansas to California to deliver the brain to Einstein's granddaughter, Evelyn. It was an act of atonement, a way to close the circle that had begun in the basement of Princeton Hospital. The drive across America with Michael Paterniti was a surreal reflection of Harvey's earlier solitary travels. This time, the brain was not a secret hidden in the trunk of an old Buick, but the centerpiece of a bizarre road trip. It sat in the back of a rental car in a Tupperware container, a passenger in the unfolding narrative of late 20th century America. They drove through the vast, empty landscapes of the West, the blue sky stretching endlessly above them, a silent witness to their strange cargo. Harvey, the silent guardian, began to open up, sharing fragments of his own story, the story of a man who had sacrificed everything for a scientific dream that had never quite materialized. He spoke of the weight of the jars, the smell of the formaldehyde, and the constant pressure of the world's gaze. The brain became a catalyst for a dialogue about memory, obsession, and the nature of genius itself. In roadside diners and cheap motels, the story of the stolen mind unfolded, a story that was as much about the man who stole it as it was about the man who owned it. The final return was not just a physical movement across space. It was a psychological journey for Harvey, a process of letting go of the burden he had carried for so long. He was no longer the lone keeper of the flame. He was a man sharing his treasure with the world. When they finally reached California, the meeting with Evelyn Einstein was a moment of profound emotional gravity. It was the collision of two branches of the Einstein legacy, the biological and the personal. Harvey, the man who had violated her grandfather's final wish, stood before her, offering the tangible proof of his transgression. The meeting was not a reconciliation, but an acknowledgement of a shared history that could no longer be ignored. Harvey handed over some of the fragments, a gesture that was both a surrender and a gift. It was the end of his long guardianship. The brain was finally out of the shadows, returned to a semblance of its rightful place, but the story did not end there. The rest of the fragments were eventually donated to the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia and the National Museum of Health and Medicine, where they could be studied by scientists and viewed by the public. The final return was a transformation of the brain from a private secret to a public archive. It was the moment when the 240 blocks of genius were finally offered to the world, a fulfillment of the promise that Harvey had made so many years ago. He had failed in his original mission to unlock the secrets of the brain, but in the end, he had succeeded in preserving it. The final blue-tinted image of Harvey's life is one of quiet acceptance, a man who had completed his strange destiny, a guardian who had finally laid down his burden, a wanderer who had found a way to send the stolen spark back into the light. The blue shadows of his life had not disappeared, but they were now softly illuminated by the knowledge that the engine of relativity was no longer his alone. The final resting place of Albert Einstein's brain is not the interstellar void he often dreamed of, nor the quiet ashes he had explicitly requested, but the climate-controlled vitrines of medical museums. The transition from the nomadic darkness of Thomas Harvey's cider box to the sterile, fluorescent glare of public exhibition marks the concluding irony of this long and strange saga. The 240 blocks of genius, once guarded with paranoia and secrecy in the blue shadows of the American Midwest, are now laid bare for all to see, housed in institutions like the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia and the National Museum of Health and Medicine outside Washington, D.C. These fragments, suspended forever in their amber-colored preservative, have become the ultimate artifacts of the 20th century's obsession with the physical location of intelligence. The public queue to stare at the slices of tissue, separated by thick glass, searching for visual evidence of the mind that conceived general relativity. Yet, what they see is profoundly underwhelming. Small, pale cubes of biological matter that look no different from any other preserved brain tissue. The magic that Harvey believed was trapped within the cells is nowhere to be seen by the naked eye. There is no glowing aura of brilliance, only the silent, stubborn reality of preserved flesh. The jars are no longer hidden treasures. They are public mausoleums for a stolen idea. When the scientific community finally gained widespread access to the samples after Harvey surrendered them, the ensuing rush to unlock their secrets resulted in an anticlimax that has haunted neuroanatomy ever since. For decades, Harvey had promised that the brain held revolutionary truths, but the studies conducted in the late 20th and early 21st centuries yielded results that were fascinating but far from earth-shattering. Researchers found a slightly higher than average number of glial cells, the support cells of the brain in certain areas, and noted that his parietal lobes, associated with mathematical and spatial reasoning, were somewhat wider than normal. Yet, these findings offered no real explanation for how a patent clerk revolutionized physics. The uncomfortable truth that emerged from the glass jars was that the anatomy of genius looks remarkably ordinary. The physical engine of relativity did not reveal a secret blueprint for supreme intelligence. The decades of preservation in formaldehyde had also taken their toll, cross-linking proteins and damaging DNA to the point where many modern molecular analyses were impossible. Harvey's desperate attempt to preserve the brain for the future had, in many ways, trapped it in the past, limiting what modern science could actually learn from it. The legacy of the jars is not a grand scientific revelation, but a humbling reminder of the limitations of trying to reduce the complexity of a human mind to mere biology. The true legacy of Thomas Harvey's theft and lifelong obsession is therefore not found under a microscope, but in the cultural mythology that has grown around those glass jars. The brain has become a modern relic, a secular saint's bone that people travel hundreds of miles to witness. It serves as a physical anchor for humanity's collective fascination with intellect and our deep-seated refusal to accept that a mind like Einstein's could simply cease to exist. The jars in the museum cases are silent testimonies to a century that worshipped science, yet failed to respect the wishes of its greatest scientist. They are monuments to a bizarre and deeply human story of possession, regret, and the desperate search for meaning in the face of mortality. As visitors stand before the illuminated cases, looking at the fragmented remains of the man who looked into the heart of the universe, they are confronted not with the answers to the cosmos, but with the profound silence of the organic matter that once contained them. The engine is there, preserved in flawless detail, but the spark is gone forever, leaving behind only glass, fluid, and the heavy, lingering weight of a question that science still cannot answer. Where does genius truly reside? The transition of Albert Einstein's brain from a clandestine secret to a public exhibit at the Mutter Museum ignited a fierce and ongoing debate regarding the ethics of displaying human remains for public curiosity. While Thomas Harvey had justified his theft with the promise of scientific discovery, the museum's decision to put the fragments behind glass for thousands of visitors to stare at brought a different set of moral questions to the forefront. Is it ethical to display the most private parts of a man who explicitly asked to be cremated in his entirety? The Mutter Museum, known for its collection of anatomical anomalies, argued that the educational value of the brain outweighed the personal desires of a man who was no longer alive to defend them. Yet, many historians and ethicists saw this as a final act of violation, a commercialization of a genius that Einstein would have found utterly repulsive. In the dim, blue-tinted lighting of the museum's display cases, the 240 blocks are presented as historical artifacts, but to many, they remain a symbol of a broken trust between the individual and the scientific community. The ethics of the display remain as complex and unresolved as the physics Einstein once mastered. The tension between scientific education and personal dignity became the central theme of this period in the brain's history. Visitors at the museum often stand in a hushed, reverent silence, but the atmosphere is not entirely one of academic pursuit. There is a voyeuristic quality to the way the public gazes at the brain segments, a morbid fascination that borders on the religious. People are not looking at the tissue to understand glial cell density. They are looking at it to touch the edge of greatness, to be in the presence of a relic that once contained the thoughts that changed the world. This worship of the physical matter is exactly what Einstein had feared most when he requested a quiet and anonymous exit from the world. The museum's fluorescent lights cast a cold, blue glare on the jars, a light that reveals everything and explains nothing. The display is a permanent reminder that, in the eyes of history, the body of a genius is often viewed as common property, a resource to be harvested and exhibited regardless of the original owner's wishes. This ethical rupture continues to haunt the curators and the visitors alike, a silent question that hangs in the air above the glass cases. Does deifying a mind justify dissecting its dignity? For the Einstein family, the display in the museum was yet another wave in a sea of public intrusion that never seemed to recede. Although Hans Albert had granted a reluctant and retroactive permission for scientific research, he had never envisioned his father's mind becoming a tourist attraction. The museum's defense rested on the idea that Einstein was no longer just a person, but a global icon whose life and body belong to the history of the human race. This de-individualization of a man into an icon is what allowed the ethics of the display to be bypassed by the museum's board. They viewed the 240 fragments as a collective heritage, a physical map of the pinnacle of human thought that must be preserved at all costs. Yet, every time a visitor looks at those pale cubes in the blue shadows of the gallery, the original crime of Thomas Harvey is reaffirmed. The display is not just a scientific exhibit, it is a manifestation of humanity's refusal to let go, a stubborn insistence on holding onto the physical vessel long after the captain has departed. The blue shadows that surround the glass cases in Philadelphia are a metaphor for the unresolved nature of this ethical dilemma. There is a coldness to the arrangement, a clinical distance that attempts to mask the deeply personal nature of the objects on display. The museum has worked hard to present the brain with the utmost respect, using professional labeling and sophisticated lighting to avoid a freak show atmosphere. However, the fundamental fact remains. These are stolen fragments of a man who wanted to be ash. The ethics of the display are not a settled matter. They are a living debate that evolves with our changing understanding of human rights and the sanctity of the body after death. Einstein's brain in the museum is a silent witness to our collective struggle with these questions, a nomadic relic that has finally found a home, yet remains a stranger in a world that refuses to grant it the peace of the fire. The legacy of the jars is now a part of the museum's identity, a blue-tinted mystery that continues to draw the world's gaze while simultaneously pushing the boundaries of what we consider to be acceptable in the name of science. For 30 long years, the fragments of Albert Einstein's brain had remained in a state of scientific limbo, suspended in their glass jars as Thomas Harvey drifted through the landscapes of the American Midwest. The world had largely moved on from the initial shock of the theft, and the promise of a grand revelation into the nature of genius seemed to have faded into the murky depths of the formaldehyde. However, in the mid-1980s, a crack finally appeared in the wall of silence that Harvey had constructed around his stolen treasure. This crack came in the form of a collaboration with Dr. Marion Diamond, a pioneering neuroanatomist at the University of California, Berkeley, who was fascinated by the role of glial cells in the brain's functioning. Harvey, now living in a state of quiet semi-retirement, finally decided that the time had come to fulfill the promise he had made to the world in 1955. He reached into the blue shadows of his storage and retrieved 4 small blocks of the brain, representing the prefrontal and parietal cortex, and mailed them across the country in a simple cardboard box. This act of distribution set the stage for the first major peer-reviewed study of Einstein's brain, a paper that would reignite the global fascination with the physical engine of relativity. The publication of On the Brain of a Scientist, Albert Einstein, in the journal Experimental Neurology in 1985, was a seismic event in the history of neuroscience. For the first time, the public and the scientific community were presented with actual data derived from the most famous mind of the century. Diamond and her team had spent months meticulously counting the cells in the segments Harvey had provided, comparing them to a control group of 11 other male brains. They focused specifically on the ratio of neurons to glial cells, the specialized cells that provide support, nutrients, and insulation for the neurons. The atmosphere of the Berkeley lab during this period was one of intense academic pressure and the cold, blue precision of the microscope. As Diamond peered through the lenses at the nomadic fragments, she was looking for a signature of supreme intelligence written in the very fabric of the tissue. The findings were startling. Einstein's brain had significantly more glial cells for every neuron in the left inferior parietal area than the brains in the control group. This specific region of the brain is known to be involved in high-level mathematical and spatial reasoning, as well as the synthesis of information from various senses. The conclusion of the paper suggested that Einstein's brain had a higher metabolic demand in these critical areas, implying that his neurons were more active or required more support than those of an average human. The news spread like wildfire through the global media, often simplified into headlines that claimed science had finally found the source of Einstein's genius. In the blue-tinted light of university lecture halls and late-night news broadcasts, the study was hailed as a breakthrough that justified the decades of waiting. For Thomas Harvey, the 1985 paper was a moment of profound validation. He felt that his choice to keep the brain away from the furnace had finally been proven right, as the first tangible evidence of Einstein's biological uniqueness was revealed to the world. Yet, within the scientific community itself, the paper also sparked a fierce and ongoing debate. Critics pointed out the inherent flaws in the study's methodology, specifically the small sample size, a single brain compared to 11 others, and the fact that the control group consisted of much younger men. They argued that the increased glial count could be a result of aging or other environmental factors, rather than a prerequisite for genius. The 1985 paper became the first of many such studies that would attempt to map the physical landscape of Einstein's brilliance, but it remained the most influential because it broke the long silence. It transformed the brain from a hidden relic back into a living subject of scientific inquiry, creating a new framework for how we think about the relationship between brain structure and intellectual capacity. The blue shadows that had surrounded Harvey for decades were now illuminated by the harsh light of peer review and public scrutiny. The fragments were no longer just pieces of tissue in a cider box. They were data points in a global conversation about the nature of human potential. However, the paper did not provide the ultimate answer that Harvey had hoped for. It did not reveal a secret formula for relativity or a unique neural circuit that explained everything. Instead, it revealed a mind that was subtly different but still profoundly mysterious, a biological enigma that refused to be fully decoded by a single count of cells. The 1985 study was the beginning of the end for the brain's nomadic journey, as it slowly transitioned from the trunk of a Buick to the permanent files of history, leaving the world with more questions than answers about the man who saw the curvature of time. The quest to find the source of Albert Einstein's genius eventually moved beyond simple cell counts and into the very topography of his mind, revealing a structural landscape that was as unique as the theories it produced. Scientists began to focus their attention on the parietal lobes, the regions of the brain responsible for spatial reasoning, mathematical thought, and the ability to visualize complex physical systems. In the deep, blue-tinted silence of the high-resolution imaging labs of the late 1990s, researchers discovered a startling anatomical anomaly that seemed to provide a direct link between Einstein's biology and his legendary thought experiments. They found that Einstein's brain lacked a specific groove called the parietal operculum, a structural feature present in the vast majority of human brains. This missing piece meant that the surrounding areas of his parietal lobes were significantly larger and more interconnected than normal, expanding by nearly 15%. This was the anatomy of imagination, a physical expansion of the brain's territory that allowed for a level of abstract visualization that defied conventional human limits. The blue shadows of the laboratory screens revealed a mind where the boundaries between mathematical logic and visual imagery had been physically dissolved, creating a unified neural engine for perceiving the invisible laws of the cosmos. Einstein himself often spoke of his thinking process not as a series of equations or words, but as a vivid ballet of images and physical sensations. He famously imagined himself riding alongside a beam of light or falling inside an elevator in deep space to unlock the secrets of relativity. The anatomical findings suggested that his brain was physically optimized for this kind of visual thinking. The absence of the parietal operculum allowed the Sylvian fissure to merge with other grooves, effectively removing a barrier that usually separates different functional zones of the brain. In the cool, sapphire light of the research journals, this was described as a masterpiece of neural efficiency. It was as if the hardware of his mind had been rewired to allow for faster and more fluid communication between the centers of spatial and mathematical logic. To Thomas Harvey, who had guarded these fragments for nearly half a century, these findings were the ultimate justification. He had always believed that the brain was not just a collection of tissue, but a map of a higher dimension of thought. And the discovery of the expanded parietal lobes felt like the final decoding of a sacred text. The nomadic fragments were no longer just symbols of a theft. They were the physical evidence of a mind that had been built to see what others could only calculate. However, the discovery of this anatomical uniqueness also raised profound questions about the nature of human potential and the origins of brilliance. Was Einstein born with this unique brain structure? Or did his years of intense conceptual labor physically reshape the architecture of his mind? The debate in the scientific community was as intense as the blue glare of the fluorescent lights in the archives. Some argued that the expanded parietal lobes were a genetic gift, a biological predisposition that made his revolutionary insights possible. Others suggested that the brain's plasticity meant that Einstein's lifelong habit of visualizing complex problems had caused his neural pathways to expand and reorganize over time. This anatomy of imagination was not just a static map, but a living record of a life spent contemplating the infinite. The blue-tinted scans of the tissue seemed to pulse with this ambiguity, representing a mind that was both a product of nature and a masterpiece of its own making. The fragments stored in the glass jars were the silent witnesses to this mystery, holding the secrets of a creative process that translated the cold logic of the stars into the warm light of human understanding. As the research progressed, the parietal lobes became the focal point of a new kind of scientific worship. Researchers meticulously mapped every fold and fissure of the 240 blocks, searching for further clues to the mechanism of his genius. They found that the complex folding patterns in his prefrontal cortex, the area associated with planning and concentration, were also exceptionally intricate. The atmosphere of the labs was one of clinical awe, a sense that they were exploring the ruins of a lost civilization of thought. Each new discovery added a layer to the mythology of the nomadic relic, reinforcing the idea that Einstein was biologically distinct from the rest of humanity. Yet, the deeper they looked into the blue shadows of the neurons, the more they realized that the brain was only half the story. The structural anomalies provided the capacity for greatness, but they did not explain the spark of curiosity or the unwavering courage it took to challenge the foundations of Newtonian physics. The anatomy of imagination was the vessel, but the spirit of the man remained elusive, hidden somewhere in the gaps between the cells that even the most powerful microscopes could not bridge. The jars remained on their shelves, silent and profound, representing a mind that had been dissected but never fully captured, a nomadic spark that continued to flicker in the clinical blue light of the 20th century. Despite the anatomical discoveries, the saga of Einstein's brain in the early 21st century became a narrative of loss as much as discovery. The physical collection, once held entirely by Thomas Harvey, had become a fractured diaspora, with pieces scattered in museums, university archives, and even private collections across the globe. This fragmentation made a unified study of the brain an impossibility. The vanishing mind became a reality not just in a metaphorical sense, but in a physical one. Many of the 240 blocks were now missing or unaccounted for. Some were suspected to have been lost in the mail during Harvey's decades of amateur distribution, while others had been consumed in destructive analysis techniques. The detailed logbooks Harvey had kept in his blue-tinted cans and twilights were incomplete, their pages yellowed and faded, holding the secrets of transactions that could no longer be verified. The museum curators, who were now the primary guardians of the remaining jars, found themselves managing an incomplete archive, a collection of pieces from a puzzle that would never be whole again. The blue glow of the museum displays now felt less like a celebration of science and more like a vigil for a slowly disappearing relic. The degradation of the remaining tissue was another form of vanishing. Decades of immersion in formaldehyde and embedding in celluloid had preserved the structure, but it also rendered the brain biologically inert. The DNA was too fragmented for modern genetic sequencing, and the subtle chemical markers that might have revealed clues about neurotransmitter activity were long gone. The brain was a visual record, a silent map, but it was no longer a biological resource that could be interrogated by the most advanced technologies of the new millennium. The researchers of the 2000s who looked at the samples under powerful microscopes were looking at an echo of the past, not a window into the future. The scientific potential of the brain had been spent in the very act of preserving it. The blue shadows in the high-tech labs seemed to deepen with this realization, reflecting a melancholy truth, that in trying to hold onto the physical mind of a genius, science had ultimately let it slip away. The brain of Albert Einstein had become a symbol of the limits of our ability to capture and understand the essence of human intellect through purely physical means. This process of vanishing extended to the cultural memory of the brain as well. The shock and scandal of the 1955 theft had faded into a historical footnote, a bizarre anecdote often told with a sense of detached curiosity rather than moral outrage. The brain had become a pop culture object, referenced in books and documentaries, but its connection to the actual man, the pacifist, the refugee, the philosopher, was increasingly tenuous. The public gaze at the museum jars was often one of morbid fascination rather than deep intellectual engagement. People were drawn to the physical relic, but they were less connected to the ideas that had once sprung from it. The nomadic journey had ended, but the brain had not found a true home. It existed in a state of suspended animation, both physically and culturally. The blue light of the Mutter Museum was not the illuminating light of understanding, but the cold, preserving light of a mausoleum. The vanishing mind was a slow fade into the realm of legend, a biological artifact that was slowly being replaced by the mythology that surrounded it. Yet, even in its fragmented and fading state, the brain retained a powerful symbolic resonance. It was a physical anchor for humanity's enduring obsession with genius and our collective refusal to accept the finality of death. The missing pieces and the degraded tissue only added to the mystique, creating a sense of a mystery that would never be fully solved. The scientists and historians who continued to study the remains were not just analyzing tissue, they were engaged in an act of historical preservation, trying to save what was left of a story that defined the 20th century. The blue-tinted images of the brain sections, projected onto screens in lecture halls, were not just anatomical diagrams, they were portraits of a vanishing icon. The brain had become a kind of sacred ruin, a testament to a bygone era of scientific inquiry, and a reminder of the enduring power of the human mind to challenge the boundaries of the possible. The nomadic relic had finally stopped moving, but its journey through the human imagination was far from over. As the 21st century deepened, the physical remains of Albert Einstein's brain reached the limits of their biological utility, but the narrative of the nomadic relic was far from over. A new era of preservation began, one defined not by the pungent scent of formaldehyde or the cold glass of museum jars, but by the silent, electric precision of the digital world. The transition from flesh to data marked the digital resurrection, a process where the physical fragments Harvey had so zealously guarded were translated into high-resolution maps of light and shadow. In the sterile, blue-tinted clean rooms of specialized imaging facilities, the nomadic fragments were placed under the scanners of the new millennium. These machines, capable of capturing details at a microscopic level that Harvey could only have dreamed of, began to convert the architecture of genius into a massive database of zeros and ones. The blue light of the computer monitors replaced the blue shadows of the basement lab, casting a new kind of glow on the gray matter. The brain was no longer just a collection of tissue. It was becoming a digital archive, a virtual mind that could be accessed from anywhere on the planet. This was the ultimate realization of Harvey's dream of global scientific cooperation, yet it came with a cold, technological detachment that further distanced the mind from the man. The centerpiece of this digital era was the creation of the Einstein Brain Atlas, a comprehensive digital record of the 240 blocks and the thousands of microscopic slides derived from them. This project, undertaken by the National Museum of Health and Medicine, aimed to make the brain accessible to the international scientific community in a way that was previously impossible. Researchers in Tokyo, London, and Cape Town could now sit in front of their screens and zoom into the very parietal lobes where the secrets of relativity were thought to hide. In the sapphire glow of high-definition displays, the complex folding patterns of Einstein's cortex were rendered with such clarity that they looked like landscapes of a distant planet. This digital resurrection allowed for a new kind of exploration, a non-destructive journey through the mind where scientists could measure, compare, and analyze without ever touching a single cell. The nomadic relic had found its final home in the cloud, a decentralized existence that mirrored the decentralized way Harvey had distributed the pieces decades before. However, the digital clarity also highlighted the profound silence of the tissue. We could now see more than ever before, yet the spark of genius remained as elusive as it had been under Harvey's silver microtome. The digital resurrection also brought Einstein's brain into the palm of the public's hand in a literal sense. In 2012, an iPad application was released that allowed anyone with a tablet to browse through the microscopic slides of the most famous brain in history. This was the ultimate democratization of the relic, a transition from a stolen secret to a digital commodity. The blue light of handheld screens now illuminated the neurons that had once envisioned the curvature of time. Users could scroll through the frontal lobe or the hippocampus with a flick of a finger, turning the solemn remains of a human being into an interactive experience. While this was hailed as a triumph of educational technology, it also marked a new peak in the commodification of Einstein's remains. The ethical debate that had haunted the museum displays now shifted to the digital realm. Was it a tribute or a desecration to turn a man's private mind into a downloadable app? The blue shadows of the digital era were filled with this ambiguity, representing a world that could capture the data of a genius but struggled to respect the dignity of the person. The digital resurrection ensured that the physical mind would never truly vanish, but it also turned it into a permanent spectacle of the information age. As the pixels replaced the cells, the mystery of Albert Einstein's brain became a story of information as much as biology. We began to look for the code of his genius in the digital maps, searching for algorithms of thought in the connections between visualized neurons. The atmosphere of current research is defined by this cold, digital precision, a sense that we are close to a breakthrough, yet still infinitely far away. The nomads of the future are not pathologists with cider boxes, but data scientists with high-speed connections, traveling through the virtual folds of the brain in search of a hidden pattern. The blue light of the digital archive is the light of a new kind of immortality, one that is perfect, unchanging, and profoundly disconnected from the warmth of a living breath. The nomadic relic has become a ghost in the machine, a digital spark that continues to flicker in the silicon heart of the 21st century. The journey that began in the dark basement of a New Jersey hospital has finally reached the infinite expanse of the internet, where the mind of the man who redefined the universe continues to be a prisoner of our curiosity, suspended forever in the blue light of the screen. As the fragments of Albert Einstein's mind were cataloged into digital databases and displayed behind museum glass, a profound distance began to grow between the physical relic and the actual man who had once breathed, laughed, and played the violin. The narrative of the stolen brain had become so powerful that it threatened to overshadow the legacy of the person who had occupied that body, the pacifist, the refugee, and the philosopher who had spent his life warning humanity about the very forces he had helped to unleash. In the deep, blue-tinted silence of historical archives, there exists a different kind of record, the letters, the photographs, and the personal belongings that remind us that Einstein was not just a biological engine of genius, but a man of immense warmth and complex contradictions. This is The Memory of the Man, a journey back through the blue shadows of history to find the soul that Thomas Harvey had so completely ignored in his quest for the physical seat of intelligence. While the world stared at the jars, the memory of the man continued to flicker in the echoes of his words and the enduring impact of his humanitarian ideals. Einstein's final wishes, to be cremated and have his ashes scattered in an undisclosed location, were rooted in a deep-seated humility and a profound distrust of idol worship. He understood that once the light of life is extinguished, the vessel that carried it is merely matter, returning to the cosmos from which it came. He did not want a monument, he did not want a pilgrimage site, and he certainly did not want his brain to become a nomadic curiosity. In the cool, sapphire light of his personal correspondence, we see a man who was deeply concerned with the dignity of the individual and the sanctity of a private death. He viewed his fame as a burden, a whirlwind that he navigated with a mixture of amusement and exhaustion. To him, the value of a person was not found in the density of their neurons, but in the quality of their character and their commitment to the welfare of others. The theft of his brain was the ultimate violation of this philosophy, a literal dismantling of the privacy he had fought so hard to maintain during his life. The blue shadows of the Princeton Cemetery, where his family mourned him, remain a silent testimony to the peace that was stolen from him by a man with a scalpel and an obsession. The focus on the brain as a physical object has often distracted from the fact that Einstein's genius was as much a product of his environment and his personality as it was his anatomy. He was a product of the turbulent 20th century, a man whose worldview was shaped by the rise of fascism, the horror of the atomic bomb, and the search for a unified theory that could explain the harmony of the universe. His ability to think outside the box was not just a result of expanded parietal lobes. It was a result of his rebellious spirit and his willingness to question the most fundamental assumptions of his time. He was the man on the bicycle, the man with the wild hair and the gentle eyes, who believed that imagination was more important than knowledge. In the blue-tinted footage of his final years, we see a grandfatherly figure who remained a student of the universe until his very last breath. This version of Einstein, the living, breathing philosopher, is what is lost when we reduce him to a series of 240 blocks in a cider box. The memory of the man is a reminder that genius is a holistic phenomenon, a spark that exists in the space between the cells and the spirit. As we move further into the digital age, the challenge becomes how to preserve the memory of the man alongside the data of the brain. We must ask ourselves if the 240 fragments have helped us understand Einstein any better, or if they have merely served as a distraction from his actual message. The blue light of our screens can show us the structure of his cortex, but it cannot show us the depth of his compassion or the logic of his pacifism. The legacy of Albert Einstein is not stored in a jar. It is stored in the laws of physics that govern our world and the moral challenges he left for future generations. He remains a nomadic presence in our culture, not because of Thomas Harvey's journey across America, but because his ideas continue to wander through the minds of every person who looks at the stars and wonders why. The memory of the man is the true engine of relativity, a light that continues to shine through the blue shadows of time, reminding us that while the brain can be stolen, the essence of a life lived for truth and humanity can never be captured in glass. The silence that fills the corridors of the medical museums where the fragments of Albert Einstein's brain reside is a heavy, profound silence that speaks to the ultimate failure of biological reductionism. For over 7 decades, humanity has chased the phantom of genius through the microscopic corridors of the most famous mind in history. Yet the why of his brilliance remains as elusive as the edge of the universe he once sought to define. In the deep, blue-tinted shadows of the contemporary laboratory, we are forced to confront a humbling reality, that the physical hardware of a human being, the neurons, the glia, the folds of the cortex, is only a small part of a much larger and more mysterious whole. This is the unsolved mystery of genius, a final reckoning with the limits of our understanding, and the realization that the stolen spark was never truly captured within the glass jars. The nomadic relic has been sliced, scanned, and digitized, yet it continues to guard its secrets with a stubborn, silent dignity that defies the prying eyes of the 21st century. The central irony of the entire Einstein brain saga is that the more we have looked, the less we have truly seen. Each new study, from diamond cell counts to the high-resolution digital atlases of the modern era, has provided a new piece of the anatomical puzzle, but none have revealed the actual mechanism of a revolutionary thought. We found more glial cells, but we could not explain the leap of intuition that led to the equivalence principle. We mapped the expanded parietal lobes, but we could not find the physical source of the courage it took to dismantle 200 years of Newtonian physics. In the cool, sapphire glow of the research monitors, we see a map that is perfect in its detail but utterly silent in its meaning. It is as if we have disassembled the finest clock in the world and laid out its gears on a velvet cloth, only to realize that we still do not understand the nature of time itself. The brain of Albert Einstein has become a metaphor for the ghost in the machine, the intangible essence of consciousness that exists in the space between the cells, a spark that cannot be weighed, measured, or preserved in formaldehyde. The scientific quest for the source of genius has often ignored the fact that Einstein's mind was not a static object, but a dynamic process shaped by a lifetime of rebellion, philosophy, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. His genius was not just a biological predisposition, it was a choice, a relentless pursuit of the simple and the elegant in a world of complexity. The anatomical anomalies we have found might have been the necessary conditions for his brilliance, but they were not the sufficient ones. Thousands of people may walk the earth today with similarly expanded parietal lobes or high glial counts, yet there is only one Einstein. This realization shifts the mystery from the realm of biology to the realm of the spirit. The blue shadows of the archive remind us that a mind is not a vessel to be filled or a machine to be tuned, but a fire to be lit. By focusing so intensely on the physical remains, we have perhaps missed the true lesson of Einstein's life, that the greatest secrets of the universe are unlocked not through the study of the brain, but through the application of the imagination. As we look back on the long, nomadic journey of the jars, from the dark basement of Princeton to the high-tech vitrines of the modern museum, we see a story of human obsession and the desperate desire to possess greatness. Thomas Harvey believed he was saving the future by stealing the past, but in reality, he was merely capturing the echo of a sound that had already faded. The mystery of genius remains unsolved because it is not a scientific problem to be solved, but a human experience to be witnessed. The fragments in the jars are silent witnesses to our collective fascination and our deep-seated fear of the finality of death. They remain on their shelves, bathed in the perpetual blue light of the laboratory, a reminder that while the brain is a biological organ, the mind is a cosmic phenomenon. The engine of relativity has been dismantled, but the journey of the spirit continues, a light that shines through the blue shadows of history, inviting us to look past the tissue and the glass and to find the genius within our own capacity for wonder. The nomadic relic has reached the end of its physical road, but the enigma it represents will forever wander through the halls of human consciousness, a silent, blue-tinted reminder of the infinite distance between what we can measure and what we can truly understand. The era of the nomadic wanderer has finally come to a close, and the cider box that once rattled in the trunk of a Buick has been replaced by the high-security, climate-controlled vaults of the world's most prestigious medical institutions. This is the stage of the final guardian, a transition from the chaotic obsession of a lone pathologist to the cold, bureaucratic stewardship of the museum curator. In the deep, blue-tinted silence of the National Museum of Health and Medicine and the Mutter Museum, the fragments of Albert Einstein's brain have finally found a permanent sanctuary. Yet, this new form of guardianship brings with it a different kind of weight, a responsibility not just to preserve the tissue, but to manage the legacy of a theft that has become inseparable from the history of science itself. The curators of today are the heirs to Thomas Harvey's transgression, tasked with protecting a relic that was never supposed to exist in the first place. They move through the blue shadows of the archives with a clinical precision, ensuring that the 240 blocks remain stable, the formaldehyde remains clear, and the dignity of the man is somehow recovered from the fragments of his mind. The final guardian is no longer a person with a secret. It is an institution with a protocol, a silent sentinel standing watch over the most controversial remains in modern history. The atmosphere in these modern vaults is defined by a heavy, sterile stillness that contrasts sharply with the dusty, desperate rooms where Harvey once performed his rituals. Here, the blue light is not from a flickering neon sign or a desk lamp, but from the specialized LED systems designed to prevent the degradation of organic matter. The jars sit on steel shelves, organized with a mathematical perfection that mirrors the logic of the mind they contain. The final guardians do not look at the brain with the feverish hope of a breakthrough. They look at it with the detached gaze of the historian. They understand that their role is to ensure that the story of the stolen brain does not end in a trash heap or a forgotten basement, but remains a permanent record of humanity's complicated relationship with its own icons. Every time a curator checks the seal on a vial or updates the digital inventory, they are participating in a multi-generational relay of custody. The burden has shifted from the individual to the collective, yet the mystery remains just as profound as it was in 1955. The blue shadows of the vault are filled with the weight of this institutional responsibility, a quiet acknowledgement that some secrets are too powerful to be left in the hands of a single man. However, being the final guardian also means navigating the treacherous waters of public demand and ethical scrutiny. The museums are constantly pressured to allow more research, more displays, and more media access to the fragments. The curators must act as the gatekeepers of Einstein's privacy, a role that Thomas Harvey failed so spectacularly to perform. They must decide which researchers are worthy of a sample and which requests are merely fueled by a morbid curiosity. In the cool, sapphire light of the museum offices, these decisions are made with a solemnity that reflects the sacred nature of the remains. The final guardians are the ones who must say no to the commodification of the brain, protecting the fragments from becoming mere curiosities in a global spectacle. They are the ones who must balance the needs of science with the respect for the dead, a delicate act of equilibrium that defines the modern ethics of anatomy. The blue-tinted corridors of the museum are the final frontier for Einstein's brain, the place where the nomadic journey ends and the long, silent sleep of history begins. The legacy of the final guardian is one of professional atonement. By providing a stable and respectful home for the fragments, the museums are attempting to rectify the original sin of the theft. They have turned a stolen prize into a public trust, a transformation that has allowed the brain to become a tool for education rather than just a source of scandal. Yet, as the curators walk through the archives in the quiet hours of the night, they cannot help but feel the presence of the man who once inhabited that mind. The 240 blocks are a reminder that even the most powerful institutions are merely temporary caretakers of a genius that belongs to the universe. The blue shadows of the final sanctuary are a testament to the endurance of that genius, a light that continues to shine through the glass and the fluid, reminding us that while the journey of the nomad is over, the story of the brain is far from finished. The final guardian stands at the threshold of history, a silent witness to the fact that while we can capture the flesh and the data, the essence of a mind like Einstein's will always remain a wanderer, forever out of reach of even the most sophisticated archives. The long, nomadic odyssey of Albert Einstein's brain has reached its final destination, not in the stars, but in the silent, blue-tinted stillness of the museum vault. This is the moment of the final image, a culminating reflection on 70 years of obsession, theft, and scientific inquiry that has forever changed our understanding of the relationship between genius and biology. As we stand before the final jar, bathed in the perpetual sapphire light of the modern archive, we are confronted with an image that is both hauntingly simple and infinitely complex. The 240 blocks of tissue, suspended in their clear preservative, represent the remains of the mind that unlocked the secrets of the atom and the curvature of space-time. Yet, looking at them, one is struck by their silence. The engine of the 20th century has been dismantled and turned into a still life, a biological memento mori that stands as a testament to humanity's desperate refusal to let go of its icons. The final image is not a breakthrough in physics. It is a portrait of a mind that has been turned into a symbol, a nomadic relic that has finally found its rest in the cold embrace of history. The blue shadows of the vault cast long, shimmering reflections on the glass jars, creating an atmosphere of clinical reverence. In this final image, the brain is no longer a biological organ but a secular relic, a modern equivalent to the bones of a saint. We see the texture of the cortex, the delicate webbing of the blood vessels, and the pale, firm cubes of the parietal lobes where the light of relativity once burned. This is the legacy of Thomas Harvey, a man who believed that by capturing the physical vessel, he could capture the essence of the spark. But the final image reveals the tragedy of his obsession. The brain in the jar is a mind without a person, a map without a country. It is a reminder that while we can preserve the tissue, we cannot preserve the curiosity, the humor, or the moral courage that made Einstein who he was. The nomadic journey from the basement of Princeton to the high-tech scanners of the digital age has been a search for an answer that the jars were never meant to provide. The final image is a humbling acknowledgement of the limits of science, a silent testimony to the fact that the greatest mysteries of the universe remain hidden in the gaps between what we can see and what we can only feel. As the digital age continues to map and scan these fragments, the physical jars remain as a bridge to the past. They are a tangible link to the morning in 1955 when a pathologist with a scalpel made a choice that would ripple through the decades. The final image of the brain is also a reflection of our own obsession with the tangible. We want to touch genius, to measure it, to own it. We want to believe that if we just look closely enough at the neurons, we will find a secret formula for our own greatness. But the blue light of the museum reveals a different truth. It shows us that Einstein's mind was not a static object to be possessed, but a living process to be experienced. The jars are merely the empty shell of a star that has long since gone supernova, leaving behind only the cold ashes of its former brilliance. The final image is a call to look beyond the glass and the formaldehyde, to find the true legacy of Einstein in the ideas that continue to shape our world, and the spirit of inquiry that he left for all of humanity. In the quiet hours of the archive, the final image of the brain becomes a symbol of the 20th century itself, a century of unprecedented scientific progress and profound moral complexity. The stolen brain is a metaphor for a world that has mastered the forces of nature but still struggles to master itself. It is a reminder of the fragility of the human condition and the enduring power of the mind to transcend its biological limits. As the curators close the vault and the blue lights fade, the nomadic relic remains in the dark, a silent guardian of its own mystery. The journey of the jars has ended, but the journey of the mind continues, a light that shines through the blue shadows of history and invites us to look at the universe with the same wonder and humility that Einstein once did. The final image is not the end of the story, but a beginning, a point of departure for a new generation of dreamers who will look at the stars and remember that the mind is not a jar to be filled, but a fire to be lit. The nomadic spark has returned to the shadows, but its warmth remains in the hearts of those who continue to seek the truth. The physical odyssey of Albert Einstein's brain in the blue-tinted shadows of the mid-20th century was mirrored by an equally surreal transformation in the realm of public consciousness. Long before the jars reached the sterile safety of the museum, the image of Einstein himself had been harvested, processed, and repackaged into the universal logo for genius. This is the stage of the cultural icon, a process where a complex, living man was slowly eclipsed by a caricature of messy hair, a protruding tongue, and a brain that was no longer a biological organ but a marketing tool for the infinite. In the neon-lit blue haze of late-night television and pop culture advertisements, Einstein's face became a shorthand for ultimate intelligence, a secular saint of the information age. The theft of his brain was the catalyst that allowed this myth to harden into a physical reality, suggesting that greatness was something that could be possessed, bottled, and studied like a rare specimen. The cultural icon was born the moment the public realized that even the most revolutionary mind in history could be reduced to a collection of glass jars and a recognizable silhouette. As the decades of Harvey's nomadic journey passed, the brand of Einstein grew to a size that the man himself would have found terrifying. His likeness appeared on everything from coffee mugs to high-tech software packages, often used to lend a sense of intellectual authority to products that had nothing to do with physics or pacifism. In the blue light of department store windows and digital billboards, the icon stared back at humanity with a mixture of amusement and weariness, a silent witness to its own commodification. The stolen brain became the secret foundation of this brand, the physical proof that there was something other about this man that justified his elevation to the status of a global mascot. The mystery of the jars provided a dark, alluring edge to the Einstein myth, turning him from a brilliant physicist into a figure of modern folklore, the mad scientist who was both the creator and the victim of his own brilliance. This cultural transformation meant that the public no longer saw Einstein as a person with a history and a family, but as a disembodied intelligence that existed in a state of perpetual blue-tinted celebrity. The irony of this iconization was that it occurred simultaneously with the literal dismantling of his privacy. While the world celebrated his image, Thomas Harvey was quietly cutting his mind into pieces in the blue shadows of various temporary homes. The cultural icon was built on the ruins of the man's final wishes. Every time a child looked at a poster of Einstein and felt a spark of curiosity, they were engaging with a myth that was sustained by a crime. This paradox is at the heart of the cultural icon, the way humanity honors its heroes by consuming them. The brain in the jar became the ultimate symbol of this consumption, a physical manifestation of our need to hold onto the light even if it means destroying the lamp. In the cool, blue-tinted atmosphere of modern media studies, we see how Einstein's image was used to domesticate the dangers of the atomic age, turning a man who had seen the apocalypse into a gentle, harmless figure of fun. The icon was a shield, a way for the public to approach the terrifying complexity of the universe without having to confront the moral weight of the science that revealed it. Today, the cultural icon and the physical fragments are finally reunited in the public gaze of the museum. Visitors stand before the jars, seeing not just the tissue of a scientist, but the source code of a legend. The blue shadows of the archive are filled with the ghosts of 1,000 advertisements and 1,000,000 classroom posters, all converging on the small, pale blocks of the parietal lobes. The icon has survived because it satisfies a deep human need to believe that genius is a tangible substance, a magic that can be distilled and passed down through the generations. Einstein's brain has become a modern secular relic, a physical anchor for a world that is increasingly digital and abstract. As the blue light of the museum cases reflects off the glass, we are reminded that while the man died in 1955, the icon is immortal. It continues to wander through our films, our books, and our collective imagination, a nomadic spark that has been transformed into a permanent flame. The cultural icon is the final form of Albert Einstein's journey, a state of being where the mind is no longer a prisoner of the body or the jar, but a ghost that haunts the very idea of human potential. The dawn of the third millennium brought with it a radical shift in how humanity perceives the origin of intelligence, moving away from the static, physical samples preserved in Thomas Harvey's glass jars and toward the dynamic, invisible realms of neural networks and synaptic connectivity. This is the era of the science of genius in the 21st century, a period where the nomadic relic has been largely superseded by the study of the living connectome. In the cool, blue glow of contemporary research facilities, the questions have changed. Scientists are no longer merely asking where a specific function resides in the brain, but how the entire system communicates in real time. While Harvey sought the secret of relativity in the thickness of the parietal lobe, modern neuroscientists are looking into the timing of neural firing, the strength of white matter pathways, and the complex dance of neurotransmitters that define a thought as it happens. The blue shadows of the museum archives are now contrasted by the vibrant, multicolored maps of functional MRI, fMRI scans, which depict the brain not as a still life, but as a roaring, electric storm of information. One of the most profound realizations of 21st century science is that genius may not be a fixed biological trait determined at birth, but a result of neuroplasticity, the brain's remarkable ability to reorganize itself in response to experience. This discovery casts a new, critical light on the nomadic fragments of Einstein's brain. We now understand that every hour Einstein spent visualizing the curvature of space-time was physically reshaping his neural pathways, strengthening the very connections that Harvey later sought to measure. The parietal expansion and the increased glial count observed in the fragments were not just a blueprint for his genius. They were likely the scars of his labor, the physical remnants of a mind that had been worked like a muscle for decades. In the sapphire light of the modern laboratory, the brain is seen as a fluid, ever-changing landscape where the boundaries between nature and nurture are perpetually blurred. This shift has transformed the 240 blocks from a source code into a historical record, a fossilized snapshot of a mind that was constantly evolving until the moment the neon blue light of the operating room finally faded. Furthermore, the rise of artificial intelligence and neural modeling has introduced a new dimension to the study of the nomadic relic. Researchers are now attempting to simulate Einstein-like intelligence by creating digital neural networks that mimic the structural anomalies found in the jars. They are building virtual parietal lobes and prefrontal cortexes to see if the increased connectivity leads to higher levels of abstract reasoning. This is a new kind of nomadic journey, one where the mind travels through silicon circuits and cloud-based servers. The blue light of the supercomputer has become the new medium for the quest that began in 1955. Yet, even with the power to simulate billions of neurons, the spark of genius remains elusive. The machines can calculate, they can predict, and they can even innovate within set parameters, but they lack the existential curiosity and the moral weight that defined Einstein's life. The 21st century science of genius has revealed that while we can model the architecture of a thought, we still cannot capture the spirit of the thinker. The legacy of the jars in this new century is therefore one of humility. The more we learn about the brain's complexity, the trillions of synapses and the quadrillions of electrical signals, the more we realize how primitive Harvey's original approach was. The nomadic fragments serve as a reminder of how far we have come, yet how much of the mystery remains untouched. In the blue-tinted silence of modern neuroanatomy, the brain is no longer a physical object to be possessed, but a cosmic enigma to be explored. We are moving toward a future where genius is understood as a holistic phenomenon, a perfect alignment of biology, environment, culture, and individual will. The jars in the museum are the final relics of an age of anatomical determinism, standing as silent witnesses to our transition into an age of informational complexity. The nomadic journey of the brain has taught us that the secrets of the universe are not hidden in the flesh, but in the connections, the bridges we build between ideas, between people, and between the stars. The blue light of the 21st century continues to illuminate the fragments, but it now points us away from the tissue and toward the infinite possibilities of the living mind. The quest to find Albert Einstein's genius within the physical structures of his brain eventually reached a silent, insurmountable wall where the tools of biology failed and the inquiries of philosophy began. This is the stage of the philosophers of the brain, a threshold where we must ask if a thought can truly be found in a cell, or if the essence of a man like Einstein exists in a dimension that no microscope can ever reach. In the deep, blue-tinted shadows of contemporary thought, the nomadic relic in its glass jar has become the ultimate case study for the mind-body problem, the ancient mystery of how physical matter can give rise to the subjective experience of consciousness. Philosophers and cognitive scientists stand before the 240 blocks not as anatomists, but as seekers of the hard problem. They look at the parietal lobes and the glial cells and ask, where is the light? They realize that while we can map the circuitry of the engine, we still do not understand the nature of the driver. The blue light of the museum gallery illuminates the tissue, but it cannot reveal the qualia of Einstein's mind, the specific, internal feeling of what it was like to envision the curvature of the universe while riding a bicycle through the streets of Princeton. Einstein himself was as much a philosopher as he was a physicist, a man who understood that the laws of nature were not just mathematical equations, but manifestations of a deeper, harmonious reality. He often spoke of a cosmic religious feeling that guided his work, a sense of wonder that transcended the boundaries of the material world. The anatomical studies of the nomadic fragments have often ignored this metaphysical dimension, attempting to reduce his brilliance to a series of structural anomalies. But the philosophers of the brain argue that this reductionism is a form of scientific blindness. They suggest that the brain is not the creator of thought, but a highly specialized receiver, a physical vessel built to capture and translate the vast, invisible signals of the cosmos. In the cool, sapphire light of the philosophical archive, Einstein's brain is viewed as a masterpiece of biological tuning, a mind that was uniquely calibrated to detect the subtle rhythms of space and time. This perspective shifts the narrative of the stolen brain from a story of possession to a story of translation. The jars do not contain genius. They contain the instrument that a genius used to communicate with the infinite. The ghost in the machine, a concept famously explored by Gilbert Ryle, haunts every corridor of the research into Einstein's remains. It is the idea that the mind is not a separate entity from the body, yet it cannot be fully explained by the sum of its physical parts. When Thomas Harvey made his first cut into the brain in the blue shadows of the 1955 basement, he was looking for a ghost. He believed that if he could just find the right nerve or the right fold, the secret of relativity would be revealed. But as the decades of the nomadic journey showed, the ghost refuses to be captured. The philosophers of the brain point to the aha moment, the sudden, blinding flash of realization, as a phenomenon that defies biological mapping. These moments of pure intuition are the hallmarks of Einstein's work, yet they leave no physical trace in the tissue. The blue-tinted scans and the microscopic slides are like the discarded pages of a musical score. They show us the structure of the symphony, but they can never replicate the sound of the music itself. The nomadic relic is a reminder that the most profound aspects of our humanity are those that remain invisible to the eye. As we stand at the intersection of neuroscience and philosophy in the 21st century, the fragments of Einstein's brain serve as a humbling monument to the limits of human knowledge. They remind us that there is a sacred gap between the neuron and the thought, a space where biology ends and the soul begins. The philosophers of the brain suggest that the true genius of Einstein was not in his anatomy, but in his ability to inhabit this gap, to use his physical mind to reach beyond the physical world. The blue shadows of the museum vault are the shadows of this great mystery, a silent testimony to the fact that we are more than the sum of ourselves. The jars remain on their shelves, quiet and profound, representing a mind that was dissected but never decoded. They invite us to look past the tissue and to consider the possibility that the mind is a nomadic spark that travels through the body but does not belong to it. The journey of the stolen brain has taught us that while we can bottle the engine, we can never capture the light. The philosophers of the brain leave us with a final, blue-tinted question. If the mind is not in the brain, then where has the genius of Albert Einstein truly gone? The 70-year odyssey of Albert Einstein's brain has left behind more than just a trail of glass jars and scientific papers. It has left a complex and troubling ethical legacy that continues to haunt the scientific community in the 21st century. This is the stage of the ethical legacy and the future of the relic, a final evaluation of the cost of curiosity and the shifting boundaries of what we consider to be right in the name of progress. In the deep, blue-tinted silence of contemporary medical ethics boards, the case of Thomas Harvey is cited as the ultimate cautionary tale, a story of how a single man's obsession could override the fundamental rights of a human being to rest in peace. The fragments in their jars are no longer just anatomical specimens. They are physical evidence of a moral vacuum that existed in the mid-20th century, a time when the pursuit of genius was seen as a higher calling that justified the violation of a man's final wishes. As we look toward the future, the question is no longer what the brain can tell us about physics, but what its journey tells us about ourselves and our willingness to sacrifice the individual for the collective curiosity of the species. The ethical debate surrounding the nomadic relic has evolved from a simple question of theft into a profound discussion about post-mortem autonomy, the right of a person to control the fate of their body after death. Einstein's explicit request for cremation was a manifesto of personal dignity, a desire to prevent exactly what has happened over the last 7 decades. By ignoring this request, Harvey and the institutions that followed him established a dangerous precedent, suggesting that certain individuals are too important to be granted the privacy of the grave. In the cool, sapphire light of legal archives, we see the struggle to define where the rights of the family end and the interests of history begin. The future of the fragments is now inextricably linked to this debate. Will they remain in their glass jars forever? Or will there come a point where the scientific utility is so exhausted that the only ethical course of action is to finally grant Einstein his original wish? The blue shadows of the museum vaults are filled with this unresolved tension, a silent battle between the preservation of a relic and the restoration of a man's dignity. Shutterstock. As we consider the future of the nomadic relic, we must also confront the reality of biological decay. Even in the most sophisticated climate-controlled environments, the 240 blocks are slowly changing. The formaldehyde that has granted them a form of immortality is also a chemical cage that continues to alter the molecular structure of the tissue. The future of the brain may eventually reside not in the flesh, but in the digital clones we have created. We are moving toward a time when the physical jars may become obsolete, replaced entirely by high-resolution, virtual models that can be studied without the risk of degradation. This transition to the digital realm offers a possible ethical resolution, a way to preserve the information while finally allowing the physical remains to be laid to rest. In the blue light of the digital archive, we see the possibility of a digital reliquary, a place where the genius of Einstein can live on in a state of pure information, freed from the controversial burden of the glass jars. The future of the relic is a journey from matter to mind, a process of letting go of the physical vessel in order to honor the spirit it once contained. The legacy of the jars is also a legacy of accountability for the scientific establishment. The institutions that currently house the Fragments, the Mutter Museum, and the National Museum of Health and Medicine, find themselves in the difficult position of being the final guardians of a stolen treasure. They must navigate a future where the public sensitivity to the treatment of human remains is constantly increasing. The future of the relic involves a commitment to transparency and a refusal to allow the brain to be used for sensationalism or profit. The blue-tinted corridors of the museum must remain places of education and reflection, not just tourist stops on a road trip of the morbid. As the curators look toward the next century, they are developing protocols for the eventual disposition of the remains, a plan for the day when the journey of the jars must finally come to an end. The nomadic spark has been traveling for 70 years, and the final destination is not a breakthrough in physics, but a return to the silence of the earth. The ethical legacy of Albert Einstein's brain is a reminder that even the most revolutionary mind in history is still a human mind, and that true genius lies in our ability to respect the dignity of the dead, even as we seek to unlock the secrets of the universe. The long, strange odyssey of Albert Einstein's brain has finally come to its quiet end. The nomadic relic that traveled in a cider box across the American heartland, hidden under snow and shadow, has found its physical termination in the climate-controlled stillness of museum vaults. Yet, as the blue light of history settles over these scattered fragments, we are left with a profound realization. The journey was never truly about the tissue. The 70-year obsession with the physical remains of genius was a reflection of our own desperate need to locate the intangible, to hold the infinite in our hands and measure it with a ruler. Thomas Harvey's scalpel did not unlock the secrets of the universe. It merely carved out a monument to human curiosity and folly. The jars in Philadelphia and Washington are not reliquaries of brilliance, but silent testaments to the fact that we looked for the light in the wrong place. They are the final, melancholic evidence that you cannot dissect a symphony to find the music. The true final resting place of Albert Einstein's thought is not in the formaldehyde-soaked blocks behind glass, but in the very fabric of the reality he helped us to understand. His mind resides in the curvature of light around a distant star, in the synchronized ticking of GPS satellites orbiting the Earth, and in the boundless energy released by the splitting of an atom. The spark that Harvey sought to capture was never in the glial cells or the parietal lobes. It was a transient electrical storm that once animated a mortal body and then returned to the cosmos from which it came. The brain was merely the instrument, the temporary antenna that tuned into the music of the spheres. By focusing so intently on the instrument, we missed the song. The blue shadows of the museum archive are now the backdrop for this final truth, that the essence of a man like Einstein cannot be preserved, owned, or displayed. As we close the book on this nomadic saga, the glass jars remain on their metal shelves, glowing softly in the perpetual blue twilight of institutional preservation. They will likely remain there for centuries, artifacts of a time when humanity believed it could bottle the stars. But the spirit of the man has long since departed, wandering free in the expanding universe he envisioned. The final resting place of thought is in the continued inquiry of every person who looks up at the night sky with wonder, not down into a microscope with possessiveness. The journey of the stolen brain is over, but the legacy of the open mind is eternal. The nomadic spark has finally gone home, leaving behind only the quiet, blue-tinted shadows of a mystery that was never meant to be solved in flesh.